Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went. Year-old Aristides Polino was driving back to his home in Miami, Florida in his police SUV after completing a midnight shift. Aristides was a 25-year veteran of the Miami police force, and over the last 2+ decades, he had routinely done midnight shifts, so this was nothing new. When he got to his house, he parked his SUV in the driveway, and like always, he went right into his house. He didn't talk to his wife Clara or his son. He just went straight up to his bedroom and immediately fell asleep. About 4 hours later, at 5 p.m., Aristides woke up and he expected to hear his wife's voice somewhere in the house. So when he didn't, and the house was just totally silent, something told him that something was off. So he climbed out of bed, he put on his clothes, and he went downstairs to look for his wife. When he got down to the living room, he saw his son sitting on the couch, but he didn't see his wife. And so he asked his son, hey, have you seen your mom? And he would say, no, I haven't seen her. But sensing on his dad's face that something was wrong, he said, hey, I'll help you look for mom. And so the two men began searching the house, yelling out for Clara, and Aristides began calling his wife, but she wasn't picking up. And after several minutes, the two men reconvened in the living room, and they started going over whether or not she had told them about some appointment that day, and that would explain why she wasn't in the house. But after talking about it, they decided that she didn't have any appointments and she should be home right now. And so the men decided, maybe she went outside and she's talking to a neighbor, or, she went for a walk and she's talking to somebody on the road. And so they decided they would go outside and search the outside of the property. When they got outside, Aristides went towards the back of the property and his son went towards the front, down towards the driveway. And so as Aristides is making his way around the back of the property, he hears his son scream out for help. Aristides comes running back around the property and he sees his son standing in the driveway with the door of his police SUV wide open. 4 hours earlier, after Aristides came home, he parked his police SUV right in the driveway like he always did, and for some reason he left the car unlocked. And so he goes in the house and he falls asleep. And while he was sleeping, Clara, who was home, she exited the house and walked down the driveway to his SUV. She opened up the door and went inside. It's believed she was looking for something, although we don't know what she was looking for. And while she was in the back of his car fishing around for whatever it was she was looking for, the door she had entered the vehicle in shut behind her. And because this is a police SUV, the back seat was designated for suspects. And so the back 2 doors did not open from the inside. And there was a very thick partition separating the back seat from the front seat. So Clara could not just reach over the seats and honk the horn to get someone's attention. And Clara did not have her cell phone, so she couldn't call anyone for help. And when she screamed out for help to somebody out on the road to help her, her screams were severely muffled, and the back windows of this police car were heavily tinted, making it extremely difficult to see that there was a person in the back seat of this car. So for 4 hours, Clara desperately screamed and kicked and punched and did everything she could to try to free herself from the situation she was in. All the while, the temperature inside the car continued to go up. The SUV was parked in full sunlight, no shade whatsoever, and the temperatures that day were over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And so by the time Clara was ultimately discovered, the inside of that SUV had effectively become an oven. Aristides ran over to his vehicle and he pulled his wife out and he started doing CPR on her, but it was too late. She had died of heat stroke. Her death was ultimately ruled an accident. On May 22nd, 2021, a father and his young son were out for a walk in their small suburban town just outside of Barcelona, Spain. When they reached their downtown, they were going to turn around and walk back home, but the boy pleaded with his father to make a quick stop at the old theater. The reason the boy and many other kids in the town loved going to this old theater was because out front of it was this huge papier-mâché statue of a dinosaur, a stegosaurus to be exact. And so after a little bit of convincing, the father finally agrees and they start heading in that direction. direction. After they turned the corner and could actually see the dinosaur statue, the boy took off running while the father just stayed back and walked leisurely, watching his son the whole time. And as he's watching his son, he can see he gets right up to the statue, and then the boy just kind of suddenly stops and stares at something on the bottom of the statue. And so the father notices his son has seen something peculiar enough to make him stop and stare, and so he yells to his son, "Hey, what do you see?" And the son just points at the back right leg of the statue. And so the father thinks this is really weird, so he jogs up to his son and he crouches down right next to him and looks in the direction his son is pointing. And at first, the father believes all his son is pointing at is this fairly obvious crack on the outside of the statue on the back right leg. And he's thinking his son has just noticed that the statue is kind of falling apart. But as he's looking at this crack that his son is pointing at, he realized his son was not pointing at the crack. He was pointing at what was behind the crack, what was inside the dinosaur statue. And when the father realized what he was looking at, he grabbed his son, stood up, and ran in the other direction and called emergency services. A few minutes later, the police and fire department show up in front of this old theater. They get out and they go up to the statue and they confirm what's inside this back right leg. Afterwards, they go to their trucks and they get out chainsaws. Eventually, they were able to carve a big enough square on this back right leg that they were able to remove the thing that the father and the son had seen originally, and that was a dead man's body. Not much is known about this dead man, except that he was a 39-year-old man who his family had reported missing a couple of days before he was actually found. While we don't know this for sure, it's believed he decided to crawl inside the statue when he realized the belly of the dinosaur was movable. Now, it's not entirely clear how he figured that out. Either the belly was already moved and he saw the opening and so saw the opportunity to crawl inside for some reason, or he was poking and prodding at the statue and discovered the belly was movable, moved it aside, and then again seized the opportunity and crawled inside. But either way, the man crawled inside the statue, and then once he was in the dinosaur, his phone slipped out of his hand or slipped out of his pocket, and then instead of falling out of the dinosaur onto the ground, it fell inside the dinosaur and slid down the inside of the statue until it fell into the bottom of the bottom right-hand leg. And so the man decides to go after his phone, and so on his belly, he slides over to the back right leg, and then he begins lowering himself head first into the leg, reaching for his phone. And so as he's kind of slowly lowering himself down, using his legs to pin himself inside the statue, he gets closer and closer, and he's almost about to grab his phone when his feet lose their grip, and he slips and falls headfirst all the way to the bottom of this back right leg. The space he was in was so tight, he was not able to turn himself around and climb up and out again. In fact, it was so tight, he could barely move. His arms were pinned by his side, and so he couldn't use them to even push himself back up and out. And because he could not bend his legs, he could not use his legs to pull himself back out again either. And so this man most likely began screaming for help, but for whatever reason, nobody heard him. And so after what must have been several agonizing days, the man finally just died. His autopsy has not been made public, so we don't know for sure what actually killed him, although one could speculate he died of either dehydration or perhaps asphyxia from being trapped in this really tight space where his chest may not have been able to expand all the way, and so he would have eventually suffocated. Following the gruesome discovery, the dinosaur statue was removed from the front of the old theater. In the early 1980s, John Harder was the classic, athletic, popular kid at his high school in Delaware, Ohio, which is a relatively small town just outside of the state's capital. But unlike most stereotypes that paint high school jocks as being these total jerks, that bully people and they're kind of stupid, John was none of those things. He was incredibly friendly and very warm-hearted and seemed to get along with everyone. John also was known for having a great sense of humor. In particular, he liked to play these kind of harmless pranks that would make people smile, like the time he very enthusiastically joined the cheerleaders during a high school pep rally, despite not actually being a cheerleader himself. John was set to graduate from high school on June 5th, 1983, and his plan was to study accounting at Kent State University the following year. A few weeks before his graduation, John's high school began selling these tickets to a grad night at a huge amusement park called Kings Island. Island. Kings Island was located about 2 hours west of John's high school, and it was home to dozens of roller coasters, water slides, and many other attractions. During their so-called grad nights, this amusement park would shut down their public operations and not let anybody into the park that did not have these special student tickets that they gave to local area high schools. John, who was 17 years old at the time, was very excited at the idea of going to this grad night, and so he went and purchased tickets along with about 20 other students from his high school. At about 3:30 p.m. on Friday, May 13th, John and the other students who had bought grad night tickets met up outside of their high school. While this was a school-sponsored trip, the students were responsible for driving themselves to the park. And so after all the students were accounted for, they all piled into a couple of their cars and they began their journey to the park. After a few stops along the way to get food and go to the bathroom, the students finally arrived at the park at about 7 p.m. And on the drive, John, who had been a passenger, had drank half a bottle of rum and about 3 to 6 beers. And so when he got out, he could barely stand. He was so drunk. And so the students made their way over to the front gate. They showed the attendant their grad night ticket and they were allowed inside. And surprisingly, despite it being this special night where only people with these tickets were allowed in, it was still pretty crowded. There were lots of students that apparently wanted to come to this event. Once John and the rest of the students from the Delaware High School had come inside the park, there was no rule that they had to stick together for the duration of their time there. And so they all kind of broke into their separate groups and went their separate ways. In John's particular group was his girlfriend Pam, and for the first hour they were in the park together, all they did was bicker and fight. Onlookers would say John looked visibly upset and very emotional and very drunk. By 8:30 p.m., when John's group had gotten in line for this roller coaster, John was now openly saying, "I don't want to be here anymore, I just want to go home." It was pretty obvious he was still just mad at Pam, and that's why he was saying all this, was just trying to make Pam feel bad. And so some of the group members told John, just, "Hey man, calm down, you're overreacting, just try to enjoy this ride, and then afterwards we'll get some food, it'll be fine." But it was pretty clear that John was really worked up and seemed incapable of having a good time at this point. But regardless, John and the rest of the group, they got on this ride at about 9 p.m. and then after the ride was over, they disembarked and they walked away from the ride to regroup and figure out what was next. And they're looking around and John is nowhere to be found. And so after waiting for a few minutes and actually walking around looking for him, they decided that, you know what, he was really upset before he got on this ride. He probably just wanted to walk away and be by himself for a bit. I'm sure we'll see him later in the night. So John's group, without John, just continued going around the park, going on different rides. And for the next few hours, they kind of forgot about John. It wasn't until the end of the night when over the loudspeaker, the park officials said, "Okay, we're closing the park now," that they started walking out and wondering where John was. And they were convinced, you know what, I'm sure he's back at the cars. He's probably waiting for us because he just wants to go home. And so they leave the park, they get out to their cars in the lot, and John's not there. And so at this point, the group's starting to get a little bit concerned because no one knows where he is. They're meeting up with the other groups from their high school. No one's seen John. And so they're all just kind of staring at the front gate, waiting for John to come out, but he doesn't. And then eventually the lights in the park start shutting down and the security guard comes out front and locks the front gate. And that's when the group knew they had a problem. After an extensive investigation by police, this is their best guess as to what happened to John. After John and his small group rode that roller coaster around 9 p.m., John very quickly disembarked the ride before anybody else in his group could see him. And then John stumbled his way towards the replica Eiffel Tower that this park was famous for. This tower stood at about 300 feet tall and was built to be an exact replica of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. But this one at Kings Island was only a third the size. It had 3 elevators that went up the center of the structure, and the elevators would stop at a 50-foot platform and a 275-foot platform where guests could look out and have a great view of the park. While today, the only way to access these 2 viewing platforms is through these elevators, at the time John was at the park in 1983, the park actually had a flight of stairs that went from the ground all the way to the very top of the tower that went right up the middle of the structure, and the public was allowed to take these stairs all the way up to the first platform, that 50-foot platform. And while the stairs did actually continue beyond that, up to the 275-foot platform, the public was not allowed to go any higher on the stairs than that first platform. And so if you took these stairs, once you got to the 50-foot platform, there would be a big fence right on the stairwell preventing you from going any farther. And it says authorized personnel only, don't go any farther. And so the only people that would walk up those additional flights of stairs were staff that had a special key. When John stumbled his way over to the base of this replica tower, he did not get on an elevator. Instead, he took the stairs. So he made his way up to the 50-foot platform. And then when he got to this 6-foot tall gate preventing him from going any farther, he just climbed up and over it and continued walking up the stairs, and nobody stopped him. He finally came to a stop just below the 275-foot mark, and so he's on the stairwell, and at this point he turns and faces the inside of the tower. It's all these metal beams all over the place, and he climbs over the railing of the stairs he's on, and he climbs onto this narrow beam that's actually a part of the support structure of this tower, and he grabs onto the beam above him and just begins walking along this beam towards the center of the tower where the 3 elevator shafts are. Now, there's no safety net on either side of John, so if he slips and falls, he's falling hundreds of feet to the ground. And if he keeps walking and actually gets into the elevator shaft, there's nothing protecting him from being struck by one of the elevators, because the people who built this tower were not thinking about people walking on these exposed beams hundreds of feet up into the air. This is a totally dangerous and unauthorized area. But John just continues shimmying across this beam until he does get to the middle of the tower, and now he's literally standing looking down into the elevator shafts. And as he's most likely looking around, admiring where he was, one of the elevator cars below him began to start moving. To understand what happens next, you need to have a rudimentary understanding of how this elevator worked. A large metal rope was attached to the top of the elevator car, and from there it was thread up the elevator shaft all the way to the top, where it was fed through a pulley that was anchored to the ceiling, and then that rope was fed right back down the shaft to the bottom, where it was attached to a counterweight. A counterweight is just a large heavy weight that's designed to balance this elevator car on this pulley system. Without the weight, the elevator car would just slip off of that pulley. And so anytime the elevator car moved up, the counterweight would move down, and vice versa, making sure that car was always balanced. And so John is standing right on the edge of this elevator shaft, presumably just kind of looking around, admiring where he was, when down below him, that elevator car starts to move, and it starts to actually descend away from John. And so the car itself is not necessarily a threat to John. However, its counterweight is, because if the car is going down, its counterweight is going up, and it's right in the path of John. And so as John is leaning out over the shaft looking around, this counterweight comes screaming up and picks him off of the beam he's on and carries him up into the shaft. The impact on John was so strong that it's believed he was actually impaled on some of the exposed metal wiring on top of this counterweight, and he got totally tangled up in all of the cables on top of there. And so as John is desperately trying to free himself, the elevator operator, there was always a staff member inside of these elevator cars, he actually noticed when John got stuck on the counterweight. But of course, this worker would have no idea that's what it was. They would later recall it just felt like the car suddenly jumped. And so this worker, fearing that something had gone wrong with the elevator car itself, he decided he would ride it all the way to the bottom, let everybody get out, and then ride back up to the top totally empty to make sure that the car actually worked before allowing people back on. And so the worker went to the ground, everybody got out, he closed the doors, he began his ascent. He got to that first platform at 50 feet, no issues. He got about 10 feet above that first platform, so at about 60 feet, when all of a sudden he hears an unbelievably loud thud on the roof of his elevator car, causing his car to immediately come to a stop. And then blood began pouring over the sides of the car over the windows. After getting stuck on the counterweight, John probably did everything he could to try to free himself, but he just couldn't do it. However, when that elevator worker decided to go back up again to test the capacity of the elevator car, it reversed the direction of the counterweight that John was stuck on. And so as that car was going up, John began going down, and it was on this descent that parts of John's body must have been dangling off of this counterweight, and they must have struck one of the beams as he was going down, and that beam effectively pried him off of whatever he was stuck on and threw him over the edge into the center of the shaft. And so John would fall 200 feet and he would land on top of that elevator car, dying instantly. The park was very quick to block off the ride and the whole scene and got police involved very quickly. So only a very small number of guests and employees were aware an accident had even happened, and very few of them were aware that it had been a fatal accident. As for the police, they knew they had a dead body, but they had no way to identify the body. There was no ID cards on John, and so they had no way to let his friends know that were in the park or to tell his family. And so it wasn't wasn't until that night, when John's friends are out in the parking lot waiting for John to come out again, that they got really worried, and they went up and spoke to a security guard at the front of the park. And that security guard, after hearing their story, would tell them that actually there had been an accident in the park and there was a body, and the police are still trying to identify this body. And so maybe you guys want to go over to the hospital and see if it's your friend. And so sure enough, the friends went to the hospital, and they would confirm that the body was John Carter. To this day, no one knows for sure why John did what he did. Some say he was just drunk and it was a dumb decision that led to his death. Others say he was suicidal, but many of the people that were close to him say, no way, he was not suicidal. And other people say, John, he loved attention, and so perhaps this was a dangerous stunt gone too far. But regardless of his reasons, John had clearly intentionally entered an area that was off limits, and it got him killed. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comment section what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comment section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, the next time the like button asks you to be a reference on their job application, say yes. And then when their company calls you, proceed to tell them how unqualified and terrible the like button is. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels, hats, mugs, stickers, a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to buy official Mr. Ballin merch, go to shopmrballin.com. Also follow our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballin. There you will find all upcoming promotions and deals. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's johnballin416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. We also have a second YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin Shorts where we post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. In 1953, a man had just moved into a new apartment in London, and as soon as he went inside, he decided he wanted to renovate. And so he started by pulling down all the wallpaper in the kitchen. And as he's doing it, he makes his way into the kitchen pantry, and he pulls off one particular strip of wallpaper, and he sees behind the wallpaper, towards the bottom of the wall, is a door. There is a secret door behind the wallpaper. So he gets down and he rips off more of the wallpaper, and then he grabs the little handle and he pulls the door open. And what he sees inside of this little room was not only horrifying and would scar him for life, but the contents of this secret room would change the legal system in the United Kingdom forever. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, when the like button asks you to spray sunscreen on their back, gladly agree, but instead of sunscreen, use blue spray paint. Also, Evans on death row was horrific. But when you take a look at Timothy Evans's past, it's not really a shocker that his life played out the way that it did. Before Timothy was even born in 1924 in the southern end of Wales, his father had abandoned him and his siblings and his mother. And because Timothy's mother made almost no money, when Timothy was born, he was effectively born into poverty. As a young child, Timothy really struggled to learn how to speak properly, and then in school, he just really struggled to keep up with his peers. To make matters worse, when Timothy was 8 years old, he contracted tuberculosis of the skin on the underside of his right foot. This condition is not necessarily fatal, but it causes these large, painful blisters that take a really long time to go away, even with treatment. And because Timothy's outbreak was on the underside of his foot, it made made walking nearly impossible. And so for a few years, starting when he was 8 years old and he was diagnosed with tuberculosis of the skin, Timothy had to miss huge chunks of his schooling to get medical treatment. And then other times he was missing school simply because he couldn't walk. And considering how poorly Timothy was already doing in school, these huge extended absences were totally catastrophic for his education. In fact, later in life, it would be determined that Timothy's IQ, which is a way to measure people's intelligence, was somewhere between 60 and 70, which is very low and put him in the range of having an intellectual disability. Not long after his tuberculosis of the skin diagnosis, Timothy would remain in school despite all of these absences and despite how difficult it was for him, but his real focus would shift from getting an education to trying to find work in order to help provide for his family, who were very poor. And Timothy was willing to do just about anything for money. For example, when he was only 13 years old, he became a coal miner, one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet at the time and still today. But despite Timothy's willingness to do these really challenging jobs that often paid very little, he would always eventually get fired, or he just would not get the job in the first place. He would be rejected. And always it was because either one, he had a flare-up of his tuberculosis on his foot, which made it impossible to walk, and so he couldn't go to and from his job, and so he'd be let go, or it would be because of his illiteracy, and the job just could not take someone in that could not read, write, or really even speak very well. Or in some cases, like when Timothy tried to join the military when he was 18 years old, and World War II was raging and all of his peers are going off to fight the war, well, when he tried to enlist, the military said, we can't take you because you are illiterate and because of your foot. This constant cycle of rejection and embarrassment really made Timothy quite cynical. He felt like he just didn't belong anywhere. And so at some point, perhaps as a coping mechanism, Timothy began to lie. He'd make up tall tales about the adventures he'd been on and all the influential people he knew and the superhuman skills he possessed. Now, most people who knew Timothy didn't believe any of the stories he told, but every now and again, some people actually did. And for Timothy, that little sliver of respect he would get in that moment, even though it was built on a lie, on an illusion, it was incredible for him. He didn't get that anywhere else in his life, and so he kind of became addicted to telling these lies. Fast forward to 1947, Timothy was 23 years old, and he was still living with his family, who had left Wales and had moved to London, and they were living in a very, very poor and dangerous neighborhood. At the time, Timothy had managed to get a job as a delivery driver and had yet to be fired from it, and on one of his daily routes around the city, he wound up meeting an 18-year-old girl named Beryl Thorley, who he really took a liking to. Now, according to people who knew Beryl, she apparently, like Timothy, had a very low IQ. And so Beryl and Timothy, they meet on one of Timothy's routes, and they immediately hit it off and they start dating. And by the end of that year, they were married. They initially lived inside of Timothy's family's apartment, but when Beryl became pregnant in early 1948, she and Timothy pooled what little money they had, and they got an apartment of their own. Their new apartment was terrible. It was tiny, it was dirty, it was located in an even more dangerous neighborhood than where Timothy's family lived, but it was good enough for them, at least at first. Once Beryl gave birth to their daughter, Geraldine, suddenly their cramped living quarters seemed impossibly small for a family of 3. And they were already extremely tight on money, and now adding a baby to the mix, they really just did not have enough money to survive. Timothy immediately tried picking up extra work wherever he could, but once again, his illiteracy and his foot, or a combination of the two, held him back. And so it wasn't long before the couple was forced to start taking out these awful high-interest loans that they knew they would never be able to pay back. So they are permanently saddled with debt. They know it. And these loans are only enough to barely get by. This is not enough to move out. This is only enough to stay in their squalid and awful conditions. And so as their debt piled up, in conjunction with all the stresses of being new parents and living in this really cramped space, it wasn't long before Beryl and Timothy's marriage just totally started to erode. It started with daily arguing over one of their their many hardships, but it quickly escalated to full-blown physical confrontation that often was so loud that passerby outside in the very busy street would hear, coming from the third floor, Timothy and Beryl screaming and yelling and punching each other, to the point where people outside literally stopped and just looked up, wondering what was going on up there. As Timothy's world seemed to just kind of crumble all around him, he at first turned to a coping mechanism he had used for most of his life, and that was just to lie about his current situation. He would tell people who would listen that he and his wife and his kid were doing great and everything was fine. But, behind closed doors, that wasn't true at all, and so that coping mechanism really didn't do a lot for him. And so Timothy eventually turned to alcohol to cope with his misery. But the alcohol would only make the situation worse because it was yet another thing for his wife to be mad at him about, and he was depressed all the time, and it was eating away at their non-existent budget to pay for all this alcohol. And so Timothy would turn to yet another source for comfort, but it would be a very unlikely source of comfort. It would be his downstairs neighbor, John Christie. And the reason his downstairs neighbor was so unlikely was because John could not have been more different from Timothy. John was nearly double Timothy's age. He was incredibly smart, and he was respected not only by his peers, but really by the community. And that respect came from the fact that John had served during World War I and been right on the front lines, and had nearly been killed during a mustard gas attack when he was fighting in the trenches. And then after the war was over, John would come back to London, and he would become a police constable for quite a while, and then after retiring from the force, he became a post office clerk. But despite John and Timothy's vast differences, there was one thing they had in common: marital problems. John and his wife Ethel had gotten married back in 1920, so 4 years before Timothy had even been born. But at some point early on in their marriage, the couple had split up. They didn't get divorced, but they separated, and they lived totally apart for a while. But in 1934, the couple would finally reconcile, and that's when they moved into the ground floor apartment of the apartment building that Timothy and Beryl would move into years later. So, years later, when John is sitting in his apartment and he can hear coming from the third floor, like everybody else in the general vicinity, the sound of Timothy and Beryl fighting like crazy up in their apartment, John decided, with his experience with reconciling with his wife, that he ought to reach out to that young man, Timothy, and offer him some advice, or at the very least, be a friendly sounding board. And so John would eventually strike up a conversation with Timothy one day when they were passing each other, and Timothy was at a place in his life where he was looking for friends. He didn't have any friends. And so John, to come into his life at this point, was really good for Timothy, and so very quickly those two struck up a friendship. But this friendship was not really peer-to-peer. It was more like father to son or mentor to mentee, where Timothy really looked up to John. I mean, Timothy had never had a father in his life, and so John kind of became that. And John looked at Timothy with a lot of empathy. He could tell this was a man who was, not very bright, and he was in way over his head with debt, with this marriage, with parenthood, everything. And so John tried hard to kind of coach and guide Timothy as he navigated this very rough time in his life. And their relationship likely could have had a really positive effect, not only on just Timothy's mental health, but also perhaps on the state of Timothy and Beryl's marriage. But it was not long after John met Timothy that Timothy found out Beryl was pregnant with a second child. This was terrible news for Timothy. He knew they absolutely could not afford another child. As it was, they couldn't afford the current child they had. They couldn't afford anything. And in the United Kingdom, abortions were illegal, so there was no way to terminate this pregnancy. And so, totally desperate and terrified, Timothy turned to John for guidance. And John would later recall on the witness stand during Timothy's trial that, John did his best to try to console and comfort and tell Timothy that everything was going to be okay. You'll get another job. You'll take out another loan. It'll all work out. But, as John would say on the witness stand, his words didn't have any effect on Timothy. Timothy, by the time he came to John, was totally inconsolable, he was desperate, and he was unhinged. And so John started to suspect that Timothy might do something really drastic to make his troubles go away. And John would be correct. While you lay in bed at night and you're looking up at your plastic glow-in-the-dark stars that line your ceiling, do you ever pull the blankets up to your chin and snuggle down and secretly wish to yourself, man, if I could just one time see the world-famous traditional Chinese chime bell player Post Malone clack his bells live in concert just once, my life would be made. Or, if that's not you, maybe you're the type that walks around all day imagining what it would be like to up close and personal hear with your own ears the sweet melodies from world-renowned bassoonist Dave Matthews. Well, today, fantasy becomes reality with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a ticketing app that makes buying tickets to these incredible exclusive events super easy. Just last week, using their sweet app, I snagged front row tickets to Celine Dion's special tuba and snare drum performance. But whatever you're into, whether it's music, sports, comedy, festivals, SeatGeek has the tickets. Also, SeatGeek wants you to get an excellent deal. So when you're on their app, if you see green dots, that means good deal. You see red dots, that means bad deal. And today, SeatGeek is offering a great deal to all of you. Use code MrBallen for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code MrBallen. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app. A few weeks later, on November 30th, 1949, a very disheveled-looking Timothy wandered into a local police station in Wales, not far from where he had grown up, and he would confess to the police that he had killed his wife. He would tell the police that he had given Beryl a poison that was apparently designed to abort her fetus, but this poison was too strong and it had killed Beryl. And then after she was dead, Timothy said he panicked, and so he took her body and he dumped her down the sewer that was outside of their apartment building. And then he arranged for his daughter, Geraldine, to go stay with some people in London while Timothy fled to Wales. But after getting to Wales, Timothy said his guilty conscience was just too much, and so he turned himself in. The police immediately arrested Timothy and they brought him back to London. And then once he was in a cell in London, London detectives went out to Timothy's apartment building and they went to the manhole cover that led down into the sewer that was right outside of the apartment building, and right away they noticed something odd. They were not able to get the lid off of the sewer. It was just too heavy. It would move, but one man couldn't do it. And so after 3 police officers, they all got down, they were barely able to get this lid up and off of the top of the sewer. And then when they went down into the sewer, there was no body. There was nothing down there. And so when detectives went back to Timothy in the London jail cell and they confronted him with this revelation that, no, she's not in there, Timothy would kind of squirm a little bit, and then he would totally change his story. He would tell police that it was not he who gave Beryl this poison that ended up killing her. It was his friend and mentor and father-like figure in his life, John Christie. Timothy also told police that he left his daughter, Geraldine, in the care of John. Police are skeptical of Timothy, but because there's a child involved, they just immediately take his story at face value and they rush back to the apartment building and they knock on John's door, and John opens the door and he's standing there with his wife Ethel, and he's totally shocked at these accusations that have been lodged against him by who he thought was a very close friend of his. And John and Ethel would tell police that not only did they have no clue what happened to Beryl, but Geraldine had never been in their care. And so the police are immediately very concerned for Geraldine's well-being. You know, who has Geraldine? Where is she? But while they were there, they just did a thorough search of John and Ethel's property to make sure they weren't lying. And then after searching their property, there was nothing inside. But when police left John and Ethel's apartment and began searching the outside of the property, an area that they had briefly searched when they were there earlier, looking in the sewer, but now they're doing a much more thorough search. And during this thorough search, they find this shed that was located in the backyard of this big apartment building, and inside of this shed, wrapped in blankets, are the bodies of Beryl and her 13-month-old daughter, Geraldine. They had both been strangled to death. After processing the crime scene, the police went back to the jail where Timothy was being held, and they would tell him what they discovered at the property, and Timothy had a very muted response to it. And then when one of the detectives asked Timothy point blank, "Are you responsible for both your wife and your daughter's deaths?" Timothy would say yes. And then during a follow-on interrogation, Timothy would confess that he had been in a heated argument with his wife over money, and at some point during this fight, which got very physical, he strangled Beryl to death. And then 2 days later, he strangled his daughter to death. And then after dumping their bodies in that shed outside, he fled to Wales. Timothy would actually recant that final confession, but it really didn't matter because when he went to trial a little over a month later, the jury just did not believe that Timothy did not do it. And so very quickly, they convicted him of murder and they sentenced him to death. Just 3 months after his conviction, so on March 9th, 1950, Timothy would find himself sitting inside of the so-called condemned suite at Pentonville Prison in London. He was shackled to this table with guards sitting on either side of him in this very small cell, and then right next to him was this wall that kind of ran down the side of the cell, and on the other side of that wall was the execution chamber. And so as Timothy would have been sitting at this table, suddenly the cell door that led into the holding area would have flung open, the execution team would have rushed in and grabbed Timothy and stood him up before he could run or fight back, and then before he knew it, he'd be pushed over to the door that went through that wall into the execution chamber. Once that door was open, Timothy only would have had maybe a couple of seconds to take in what he saw, and it would have been this pale green square room with a noose dangling down from the ceiling, and right below it was an obvious mechanical trap door, and off to the side of the room was a lever that the executioner would actually pull to open up that floor and send the prisoner falling down into the pit below. And so Timothy, he would have taken this in just for a second. His heart would have been racing, and before long, he would have been standing on this trap door. The noose would have come down. They would have tightened it to his neck. A bag would have been placed over his head. All the guards would have pushed to the walls, and then before Timothy could even say or do anything, the lever was pulled, and he dropped down into a 12-foot deep brick-lined pit where he would dangle by his neck until he died. This gruesome ending should have been the end of an already very gruesome story, but it wasn't. Not even close. 3 years after Timothy's execution, a man named Beresford Brown moved into the same ground floor apartment that John Christie and Ethel had shared. John had moved out just a couple of days earlier. And so Beresford, he moves into this apartment. It's totally dirty. It's not well kept. And so Beresford decides that he's going to fix the place up. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to tear down all of the old wallpaper in the kitchen and replace it. And so he goes into the kitchen, he starts tearing down the wallpaper, he makes his way into the kitchen pantry, he starts pulling the wallpaper down in there, and at some point when he pulls one strip of paper all the way to the ground, he sees towards the bottom of this wall inside of his pantry where there are no shelves over it, behind the wallpaper, there is obviously a door, just a small door. It almost looks like the entrance to a crawl space. And so Beresford is totally intrigued, why would there be this door behind the wallpaper in the pantry? And so he rips off the remaining wallpaper over this little door. He finds the handle and he forces it open. And what he sees inside of that little room would haunt him for the rest of his life. 3 years and 4 months earlier, when Timothy discovered that his wife Beryl was pregnant with their second child, Timothy really did go to his friend John for guidance. However, this is where the story takes a turn. When Tim came to John, who was medically trained from his time in the military, he would tell Tim, hey, I can perform an abortion on Beryl if you want me to. Timothy immediately thought this was a great idea. And so totally relieved, thinking his problems are now all solved, he left John's apartment and ran upstairs to his own. He told Beryl about how John could perform this procedure for them. Did she want to do it? And Beryl said, yeah, let's do it. Now, we don't know exactly what happened next, but the running theory is that sometime in November of 1949, Beryl and Geraldine left their apartment on the 3rd floor and went down to the 1st floor, John's apartment, and when they got there, it was just John. John's wife Ethel, she was gone for the day. As for Timothy, he also was not present for this procedure, but he likely knew it was happening. So Beryl and Geraldine, they walk inside of John's apartment, and pretty quickly, Beryl finds a place, or maybe John finds a place to put Geraldine in the apartment where she's safe. And then John ushers Beryl over to this chair. It's like his makeshift medical chair, and he tells her to have a seat. So she sits down, and John goes over and gets this device. And now this device, it looks like a glass jar filled with clear liquid, and then poking out of either side of it are these black, thin, hollow tubes that come out and connect at this kind of makeshift mouthpiece. And so John, he walks over with this device, and he hands the mouthpiece portion of this device to Beryl, and he says, here, put this on your mouth and start breathing it in. There's a gas I produce that kind of numbs the pain as I do this procedure to you. And so Beryl did as she was told. She took this mouthpiece and she put it over her mouth and her nose, and she began breathing deeply. And as she did that, John grabbed a chemical and he began slowly pouring it into the glass jar where these tubes were coming out of. And as he did that, a white gas began to form above the liquid inside of the jar, and there was a cover over the top of this jar. So the gas was trapped inside of this jar. And as Beryl is taking these big breaths through those tubes, she's sucking that gas into her lungs. And very quickly, as she's breathing on this apparatus, she didn't start feeling numb. She just passed out completely. However, this was John's plan all along. That device he made her put on her face, that was only designed to make people pass out. It was not to numb any pain. John was not medically trained. He was not performing abortions out of his apartment. He was a serial killer. So with Beryl now unconscious in front of him, John did the same thing he did to the other two women he had lured into his trap and whose bodies were now buried in his backyard. He began having his way with Beryl. And at some point during this assault, Beryl woke up and began trying to fight off John, but he overpowered her and he strangled her to death. And then after she was dead, John just walked into the other room where Geraldine was, and he used a shirt tie and he wrapped it around Geraldine's neck and he strangled her to death. And then after that, he put the mother and daughter together in some sheets and he put them out in the shed in the backyard. Later, when Timothy came to John's apartment to see how the procedure had gone on his wife, John would tell Timothy that, sorry, it didn't work out and your wife is dead. Don't worry, I'll look after your daughter and make sure she's taken care of. You need to flee London and go to Wales now. And so Timothy, without really asking any questions, would do as he was told, and he would flee to Wales. But a little while later, when he tried to check in with John about how his daughter was doing, because he had no idea where she was or who she was with, John would just not let Timothy see her. And so Timothy eventually, just feeling racked with guilt about this whole situation, he went to police. And critically, when he spoke to police, he lied about what happened. He wanted to protect his friend John, who he looked at as a father figure, as a mentor, as a close friend. And so he said, I killed my wife. And so this is why Timothy got the location of his wife's body wrong, because he didn't know. He just guessed the sewer. And so that explains why when they got over to the sewer, not only was it empty, but it seemed totally impossible that anybody could have lifted this manhole cover on their own. It was too heavy. Then, after police discovered Beryl and Geraldine's body, and they went back to the London jail and told Timothy, that was the first time he found out what had happened to his daughter. Because to that point, Tim really did believe that John had just been taking care of Geraldine, or John had handed off his child to somebody else who was taking care of Geraldine. But either way, Geraldine was okay. So he's just been told she's not okay, she's dead as well. His whole family is gone. And so Tim was almost certainly in shock. And so he's sitting there with that sort of muted response as detectives are asking him, are you responsible for your wife and your child's death? And so Tim would say yes, but it's unclear if Tim actually understood their question or if he understood the implications of their question. He might have just been saying, I feel guilty about the fact that my family is dead, not that he literally killed both his wife and daughter. But when Tim finally kind of snapped out of it and really began trying to tell the truth that John was responsible, nobody believed him because his credibility was totally destroyed, because the first thing he did when he went to police was lie about what happened. And when police dug into Timothy's history a little bit, they saw he was a compulsive liar. Everybody said, oh, Timothy tells tall tales, that's just what he does. And making things even worse for Timothy was the fact that he had a very clear motive for why he might harm his family. He was under crippling debt, and his relationship with his wife was incredibly toxic and often became physical, and there were lots of witnesses to that. During Timothy's trial, trial, despite the fact that Timothy and his lawyers tried everything they could to point the finger at John Christie, saying, no, he's the guy responsible, because John was constantly on the witness stand and had this impeccable resume as this war hero and this police constable, and he was well respected and he was well spoken and he was smart, the jury completely believed him. He was the epitome of credible, whereas Timothy was the opposite. And so it was largely John, the real killer's testimony that actually put Timothy, the innocent man, on death row. Also, the police totally botched the investigation from the beginning, because the police went into the investigation already completely convinced that Timothy was guilty. This was an open and shut case, and us gathering evidence and doing all this didn't really matter because Timothy was the guy. And so because the police were so focused on Timothy, they were blind to really obvious things all around them. For example, during their several searches of the apartment complex, both inside and out, a dog ran into the backyard and actually dug up one of the skeletons from one of those two women that John had killed years earlier and buried out there. And so a human skull and a human leg bone were visible outside as police are walking around. John was able to grab the skull and chuck it next door into a burned out building, but the leg bone was literally propped up against the side of the backyard in plain view. Nobody caught it. The police are also believed to have coerced Timothy into signing his final confession, where he says, I not only killed my wife, but I also killed my daughter. There's even some speculation that the police literally signed it for him, that they forged the entire document. And so Timothy gets hauled off and executed. Meanwhile, John, the real killer, just keeps on killing. He would murder at least 4 more women, including his wife, Ethel, using the same technique, the gas machine followed by strangulation. And it was during the time that he killed these last 4 victims that we know about that John became increasingly turned on by death itself. And so that was why he stuffed his wife's body right underneath the floorboards in his kitchen, and he stuffed those other 3 women inside of that tiny little room behind that secret door in the pantry, so that all day long as he was in his apartment, it constantly smelled of decomposing flesh. After Beresford Brown opened that secret door in the kitchen pantry and discovered those 3 women's bodies smashed inside of there, he would tell the police, and then 10 days later, on March 31st, 1953, John Christie would be found and arrested. He would confess to killing all 8 victims, but the police only had enough evidence to charge him with 1 murder, and that was the murder of his wife, Ethel. But he was found guilty of that, and it was enough to warrant a death sentence. On July 15th of that year, at about 9 a.m., John Christie found himself sitting in the same condemned suite at Pentonville Prison that Timothy Evans had been sitting in 3.5 years earlier. Then, moments later, the door behind John opened up. The same execution team that killed Timothy Evans came inside, they grabbed John, they hoisted him up, they moved him over to the door that led into the execution chamber. The door flung open and John got his first look at the gallows. They rushed him over to the middle of the room. They pulled the noose down, tied it tight around his neck. They put the bag down over his head. All the guards stepped to the side. And then right as the executioner is about to pull down the lever, John, out of the blue, says, "Wait, my nose itches." To which the executioner just said, "It won't bother you for long." And then he pulled the switch. Due in large part to the massive injustice in this case, where an obviously innocent man was carted off and executed, the UK would suspend the death penalty in 1965, and then in 1969, they would abolish it entirely. Between those 2 dates, in 1966, Timothy would receive a posthumous pardon for the murder of his family, meaning he is officially an innocent man. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, when the like button asks you to spray sunscreen on their back, gladly agree, but instead of sunscreen, use blue spray paint. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We now have a podcast called the MrBallen's Podcast that uploads exclusive content on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we upload remastered audio from our best YouTube videos. Again, the podcast is just called MrBallen's Podcast, and it's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google, basically anywhere you find podcasts, you can find this one. additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen's Shorts. The other is called MrBallen en Español. We also post near daily content on Facebook and Snapchat. Both of those channels are just called Mr. Ballen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. We also have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. And if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. There are many extreme religious practices and rituals out there, but there may be none more extreme than the Buddhist monk practice of shokusenbutsu. This brutal ritual was created in 835 AD, and since then, over 1,000 years, countless monks have tried to do it. However, only 24 have ever actually been successful. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 3 phases of this ritual, and at the end, I'm going to show you pictures of what a successful shokusenbutsu looks like. However, be warned, the images are it's called. However, no one really knows what nirvana actually is, what it looks like, what it feels like, where it is. Buddhists will say that the only way to actually understand nirvana is to experience it yourself. It's kind of like trying to describe to someone what chocolate tastes like. You can use any number of superlatives to describe the flavor, but until that person bites a piece of chocolate, they won't really fully understand it. And so, the goal of all Buddhists is to try to attain nirvana. And every day, hundreds of millions of Buddhists all around the world try very hard to do just that. But within Buddhism, there is a small subset of practitioners who have effectively dedicated their entire existence to attaining nirvana. And these people are the famous Buddhist monks. It is extremely difficult to become a Buddhist monk because the sacrifice is enormous. You have to leave your family, your friends, society, all your possessions, your name, your status, everything, and go live in a monastery, which is a kind of isolated place where monks live, and there you will spend your life living this very simple, very strict religious life where basically all you do is try to attain nirvana. As a result of this extreme lifestyle that Buddhist monks live, they have developed a reputation for being some of the most disciplined people on the planet. But even by Buddhist monk standards, their sacred ritual of Sokushinbutsu takes discipline to a whole nother level. Last week, our company decided that we needed to hire a graphic designer, and so I got tasked with finding candidates. Now, I got no idea how to do that, and so naturally, I went on Google and I looked up, where can I find good graphic designer candidates? But I accidentally wrote malnourished, angry saltwater crocodiles instead of good graphic designer candidates. An easy mistake to make. But because I didn't catch it, before long, me and old Seagull Lung were stuck up in northern Australia up to our lacrimal puncta in Crocodilus porosus. Now, of course, me and Lung did our best to try to calm these beasts down and try to teach them graphic design to make the most of this work trip. But these salties were
just not that interested in graphic design, and they lacked basic finger dexterity. And so, it was as we were sitting up in this tree, hiding from this bask of angry salties down below, that old Lung jumped up and threw a javelin directly into my heart and said, "Apa miertnem hesnalod ZipRecruiter," which of course in Hungarian means, "Dad, why didn't you just use ZipRecruiter?" And boy was old Lungy right. ZipRecruiter uses its powerful technology to both find and match the right candidates to your job. ZipRecruiter also has a user-friendly dashboard with a full suite of tools that will allow you to filter, review, and rate your applicants all in one place. And now, with the invite to apply feature, it lets you immediately access a list of candidates with qualifications that match your job description. See a candidate who'd be perfect for your job? ZipRecruiter makes it easy to send a personal invite to them and other top choices. See how much easier hiring is with ZipRecruiter, which is the #1 rated hiring site according to G2 satisfaction ratings as of January 1st, 2022. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/MrBallen. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/MrBallen. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Okay, back to the story. Sokushinbutsu was created over 1,000 years ago up in the rugged mountains of northern Japan by a sect of Buddhists called the Shingon. And the Shingon believed that you could attain nirvana through physical punishment. And out of that idea was born the incredibly brutal Sokushinbutsu ritual. In short, Buddhist monks can choose to participate in this ritual, and if they successfully complete it, they might attain nirvana. But they won't know until the ritual is over. Meaning it's kind of like a big gamble. Put yourself through absolute hell, and maybe you have this huge payoff, but maybe not. However, trying to attain nirvana through other means was really difficult. There was no other really clear pathways to nirvana, and so having this one distinct pathway, no matter how difficult it was really appealing. And so since its creation, hundreds and hundreds of Buddhist monks have tried it, and maybe less than 100 have actually successfully completed it, and then of that 100 or less, only 24 have actually attained nirvana through this process. The instructions for Sokushinbutsu are actually quite simple. There are 3 phases. Phase 1 is called Moku Jikagayo, which roughly means tree-eating training, and it's primarily focused on the monk's diet. It takes 1,000 days to complete this phase. However, most monks go much longer than 1,000 days. During this phase, monks will only eat byproducts of trees, things like seeds, nuts, tree bark, tree roots, pine needles, and they will collect all this food on their own. It should be noted, though, that some monks in this first phase will ingest small rocks. This is likely done because they are starving and they can't find food, and by eating the rocks take up space in their stomach and kind of curb their appetite a little bit. But because they don't actually digest the rocks, they're not technically breaking the phase 1 diet restrictions, and so they can continue on with this ritual. Additionally, during this first phase, the monks adhere to a very involved and strenuous physical exercise routine, and then whenever they're not foraging for food or exercising, they are meditating. At the end of the 1,000th day of phase 1, if the monk has survived, because sometimes phase 1 monks do die mostly from starvation, it is up to them if they are ready to move on to phase 2. This decision ultimately comes down to whether or not, 1, the monk actually adhered to the strict rules of phase 1, something really only that monk would know, and then 2, whether or not the monk actually believes they are spiritually ready to move on to phase 2. Phase 2 is much shorter than phase 1, but it is significantly more challenging. And so the monks going into phase 2, they really need to kind of bring their A game and have no second thoughts. They need to be fully committed to phase 2 in order to successfully complete it. For reference, most of the 24 monks who successfully attained nirvana through this ritual repeated phase 1, 2, or even 3 times just to make sure they really were ready. Phase 2 is called Nyojo, and it roughly translates to deep meditation. But a better way to think about what this phase entails is these monks need to enter into a sort of trance-like state, almost like an out-of-body experience, because what they're going to go through in this phase is so physically uncomfortable that unless you're able to kind of detach mentally, there's just no way to go through with it. And so during the second phase, the monks will sit down and meditate basically constantly for 100 straight days. And during that time, they don't eat any more tree byproducts or rocks. Instead, they have a liquid diet. They drink a little bit of salt water, and they drink a lot of a very particular kind of tea. The tea is made from Toxicodendron verniculum tree bark, which contains the same toxin in poison ivy. Meaning, for phase 2, you basically just sit alone by yourself for 100 days while simultaneously drinking a poisonous tea that causes a massive allergic reaction inside of your throat and stomach that causes an intense itching sensation inside of you that you cannot physically itch. Also, this poisonous tea gives you explosive diarrhea and it makes you vomit a lot. If you somehow manage to survive all 100 days of phase 2, and unfortunately many monks don't, you automatically move on to phase 3. Unlike phase 1, phase 2 never gets repeated, most likely because it almost certainly would be fatal to do so. Phase 3 is either the easiest or the hardest part of the Sokushinbitsu ritual, depending on how you look at it. It doesn't have a name like the other 2 phases, perhaps because so few people make it to this part of the ritual, but regardless, phase 3 definitely has a strict set of rules like the other 2 phases. The phase 3 monk has a small pine box that has no windows built just for them. It needs to be big enough that they can sit inside of it in the lotus pose, which is how they typically sit when they're meditating. And then once it's all built, the monk climbs into this box. They put a lid over the top of it, but they put a bamboo shoot, like a bamboo pole, through the cover of this box, so there is a breathing tube for this monk inside of this box. And then they lower the monk inside of the small pine box 10 feet into this hole in the ground, and then once they ensure the bamboo pole is going to be above ground so they can breathe, they fill the hole in with charcoal. Before we cover what happens next in phase 3, you need some context about what this ritual is actually doing to the monks performing it. Phase 1, tree eating training, serves 2 purposes. The first is it's kind of like a big gut check. It really shows who wants to do this ritual and who doesn't. It's kind of like if you can't complete phase 1, you certainly can't complete phase 2 or phase 3. So it's like a filter. It weeds out the weak monks. The second purpose of phase 1 is to literally shrink the monk. The tree eating diet combined with the constant physical exercise removes all of their body fat and a lot of their muscle, and so they're incredibly lean by the end of phase 1. And this will be significant when we talk about the end of phase 3. Phase 2, deep meditation phase, serves 2 purposes as well. The first purpose is that it puts the monk into that trance-like state, and then the second purpose it serves is the toxin inside of this poisonous tea kills off all of the naturally occurring bacteria and parasites inside of the monk. Again, that will become significant when we get to the end of phase 3. Speaking of which, so in phase 3, the monk is put in their box, they're lowered 10 feet into the ground, the breathing bamboo shoot is installed, the charcoal is dumped on top of them, and then for several days, the third phase monk will sit in total darkness and meditate constantly, and each day, they have a bell down there with them, they ring the bell. That's the only thing they have to do besides meditate. And above ground, there is a team of monks that are supporting this ritual, and they're listening for that bell. and the first day they don't hear the bell, it means the monk in the box has completed the ritual, and now it is time to see if they have attained nirvana. In Buddhism, someone whose body does not decay, aka a mummy, is someone who has cheated death. And to cheat death is to remove yourself from the vicious human life cycle of birth, suffering, death, repeat. Meaning, becoming a mummy is a way to attain nirvana. And Sokushin Butsu is a self-mummification ritual. Phase 1 shrinks the monk's body, it removes their fat and muscle, it also removes a lot of moisture inside of their body, and their diet also withholds nutrients to all of the bacteria and parasites that naturally occur inside of their bodies. And so those bacteria and parasites that normally would play a big role in helping decompose your body after death begin to die off. And so the cumulative effect of phase 1 on these monks is that if they were to die at the end of phase 1, their decomposition would be drastically slowed. It wouldn't be mummy status, but it would be close. The phase 2 poisonous tea, that toxin that they're drinking, that kills off the remainder of the bacteria and parasites that did not die during phase 1. Also, all the vomiting and diarrhea completely dehydrates them, which aids in slowing down decomposition after death. Finally, phase 3 is the death phase. The monk goes into their tomb, they're buried underground, and they ring that bell each day to tell the people on the ground that they are still alive. And then when the bell stops ringing, it means the monk in the box is dead. At which point, the crew on the ground removes the bamboo breathing pole and then lets the body sit in the box underground for another 1,000 days. And then after 1,000 days, they pull the box up, they lift the lid off, and if there is little to no signs of decay on their body, it means the self-mummification ritual worked, they're a mummy, they've attained nirvana, and now their body is holy. And so they're brought out of the box, they're dressed in robes, they're placed in the monasteries, and they are worshipped. As for the unlucky monks who get to the end of Sokushin Butsu, but are found to be decomposing inside of their box when they're brought back up again, they're just placed back inside of their pine box and buried, and they are not worshipped. Sokushin Butsu was made illegal in Japan in the late 19th century, but we know monks continued to practice it into the 20th century, and in theory, today, monks still might practice it in secret. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, the next time the like button is counting something really important, start shouting out random numbers to mess them up. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the MrBallen's Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings we upload remastered versions of our best YouTube videos. Again, the podcast is just called the MrBallen's Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity. It's called the MrBallen's Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the MrBallen's Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels, MrBallen Shorts and MrBallen en Espanol. We put out near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called MrBallen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. To check out our merch, to join our Discord server, to see what events are coming up or what announcements are coming out of our studio, go to our brand new website, ballenstudios.com. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Hello, hello. Welcome to today's live stream. It's very exciting to be here. We're going to let some people filter in here over the next couple of minutes. So while we're waiting, let me know where you're from, where you're watching this from. Put it in the chat. I want to see where people are tuning in from here. And don't pay any attention to the merch all around me quite yet. We'll get into that in a few minutes here. So let's see. All right, here we go. Here we go. Lots of people putting in where they're from. Almost. A little bit of a delay. California. Okay, first one. Nice. I'm in Texas. I'm in Austin, Texas, where it's beginning to become excruciatingly hot. So I remember last summer, it was like consistently 110 degrees. And so like today, it's like 90 degrees and it feels somewhat mild. So that's what it's like living in Texas. Dang. How many people are in here? Like 5,000 now? 4,000? Jeez. Louisiana. Alberta, Canada. Oh my goodness. Estonia. Wow. All over the place. Who here is in this live stream just for Lungy? Because that's what I really want to know. In addition to where you're from, I want to know if Lungy's got you by his claws. I think they have claws. I think Lung's got some claws. Who's here for Lungy? Old seagull Lung. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the origin of seagull Lung is so back when I was like 8, I think I was like 8 or 9. I was on a car ride with my sisters. And we're driving up to go camping or something in Western Massachusetts. And my sister and I, my older sister and I, we were coming up with the worst possible names for a cat. And we came up with things like cardboard box. Let's see, there was a few other pretty bad ones. But as soon as I think my sister said seagull Lung, it stuck. And that name has always been in my brain. That needs to be used for something. And of course, when my old sidekick, the frog, hopped along, we knew we had to name him Seagull Lung. So that's Seagull Lung. All right, so we have a ton of people here from all over the world. South Africa, Kentucky, Netherlands. Oh my goodness, that's wild. So look, today we got a ton of stuff going on. I'm going to talk you through the run of show. So we have so we did a poll on YouTube about which story you wanted me to tell during this live stream. And overwhelmingly, people wanted me to tell a story about the forest that is so evil, it's actually illegal to enter it. That's not a turn of phrase. You'll see when I get into the story that there is literally a forest that's... Anyways, we'll get into the story, but it's the story about Dudleytown. So we're going to do that today. I've never told it live, so it's only on YouTube. So we'll do that today. Also, we're going to get into tier lists, which if you're not familiar, basically I'm going to do some ranking of some stuff. It seems kind of gimmicky, but trust me, it's cool. It'll be fun. It'll be cool. We also have a giveaway. It's a good giveaway. So if you stick around till the end, there's going to be an excellent giveaway. Also, there's a Q&A at the end. But first, for all the people that are here for old Seagull Lung, if you didn't see, in the last YouTube video, we did a mid-roll. And if you didn't know this, old Seagull Lung, he got a package in the mail. And when he opened it up, he saw it was this beautiful, brand new lily pad for him to take a nap on. But as soon as he got on that lily pad, he realized it was riddled in poison ivy and strapped to the brim with explosives and fireworks. And before long, he was blown across the yard. And he knew there's only one person who could do such a thing. The like button. Now, I tried to grab old Seagull Lung and calm him down, but it was too late. He had gone rogue and strapped some bandoliers of ammunition and some M60s, and he had taken off into the wild to seek his revenge on the like button. And so, of course, what can a guy do when your pet frog named Seagull Lung goes rogue? Well, you start by creating a limited edition merch drop. As you can see, we've created some Rogue Lungy merch. This is quite possibly the best merch we've ever created. It's literally Seagull Lung going rogue. That's the back of the shirt. We got old Lungy on the front, so you can rep Seagull Lung with pride here. In addition to the shirts, we have Lungy pins. I'm not sure which camera to point at, so I'll point at both. Boom. We got the limited edition pins. And in fact, before I even start rattling off the merch, so in order to get this merch, you go to ballenstudios.com, which I think you can see on the screen right now. Is it on the screen? Yep, it's on the screen. Boom. So you go to ballenstudios.com. And actually, we're going to do this live. Boom. Now you can see there is a new, it's called like a hero banner or something where you can actually see the Lungy merch right there. So we're going to click on there. And here we go. Let's scroll down, see what we got here. We got the old lungy shirt of him going rogue right there. Then we got the pin. There's also of course, the muscle shirt of Seagull Lung to look real tough, just like old Lung. Let's see what else we got. If you go to accessories, we have the pins again. There's stickers. Just cover the whole back of your car with those. That's the best way to use those stickers. What else? We got no, the coaster's not there. Go to the home and office, and then this is just glorious. We have basically a movie poster for old Seagull Lung. It's this is ridiculous. But hey, so these posters, we're going to be giving away 20 of these bad boys at the end. Not literally on stream, but very shortly after. And in order to learn how to enter this giveaway, you got to wait till the end. So 20 of these posters on screen right now will be given away, I think, 1 hour after the stream ends. To learn how to actually register for this giveaway, you got to stick around till the end. So we have a lot going on today, and I think that it makes the most sense here. Actually, real quick, in the chat, of all the stuff I just showed you, all the new merch, all the new Rogue Lungy merch, which stands out to you as like the must-have, the absolute creme de la creme? You got to have it, okay? Is it the graphic tee? Is it the cut-off version of the tee? Is it the pin? Is it the stickers? Is it the posters? What is it? Let me know in the chat. Let's see what we got. I need Lung poster. Things you don't think you'd ever say. God, I need that Lung poster. That's something we all need, you know? Need that Lung shirt, you know? I think the shirt's the way. Then again, the pins. Honestly, we did the pins for Valentine's Day, and they were a huge hit. These pins are amazing. Anyhow, so let's get into the story. So the story I'm going to tell you, that this is a for real disclaimer, okay? It's not intended to be clickbait, although I'm sure it will serve as clickbait, but it's really not meant to be. And I'm going to give you a really specific reason why this is not clickbait. So there is this place called, there's a forest in Connecticut that is called the Dark Entry Forest, and it is literally illegal to go to this place. Not only because it is private property, but also there's a reason why, as you'll see in this story, that basically anybody who's ever gone in this forest basically leaves. I'm going to leave it at that, okay? And to give you my specific reason why this is not some gimmick to make you want to go check out the Dark Entry Forest, after we posted this story that I'm going to tell you here in a second to YouTube, we got a letter, like a really long letter from the Dark Entry Forest Historical Society, I think it was them, from their lawyer, demanding we take the video down because all these people, all you fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious out there, I suppose, or maybe it wasn't you, they went to the Dark Entry Forest. And like, there's all these people going to the forest. So don't do it, okay? No matter how compelling, no matter how amazing this story is, don't do it. Here we go. So in the summer of 1906, there was this couple, Dr. William Clark and his wife Harriet, and they were up in northwestern Connecticut, and they're driving along this winding country road in a place called Litchfield County. And as they're driving along, I mean, it's so scenic and beautiful with rolling hills and green everywhere. And what they were doing is they were looking for a location in this area that could serve as a location for their second home. So Dr. Clark was an oncologist, and they lived back in New York City, where he and his wife lived kind of a fabulous life. You know, he was super successful. He was not only an oncologist, a practicing oncologist, but he was also a professor of surgery and medicine. I forget the name of the college, but he was a big-time professor as well. And so they lived this amazing life in New York. But, you know, their lives were really hectic. You know, New York City is a hectic place. Add in the fact that they were very social people, always going out and going to functions and this and that. And so they had some extra money, and they wanted to, you know, buy or build a second home that would kind of serve as their retreat away from the city. And after, I guess, looking all around the country, they found Litchfield County was kind of like the opposite of New York City. I mean, very few people were living there at the time. And again, it's this beautiful scenic place. And so it just seemed kind of like the perfect spot. So again, Dr. Clark and Harriet, they're just driving along, beautiful day, and they eventually, in Litchfield County, they eventually reach this beautiful red wood-covered bridge, and they go over it, and when they get to the other side, it kind of opened up, like their field of view opened up, because there weren't as many trees right on the other side of this bridge, and they suddenly had this view up and to the right, maybe, you know, half a mile away or something, of this weirdly shaded forest. Now you got to remember that basically everywhere they're looking, there's trees everywhere. I mean, it's very densely forested everywhere, but there was just this one kind of rise, like a pretty big hill, a prominent hill that was really dark, like totally shaded. And it was because there was 2 mountains or 2 hills on either side of it, almost creating like a valley. And so it just looked like, wow, that's a very shaded forest. And as you'll see, it's actually called the Dark Entry Forest, in part because of how shaded it is. And so they've just come out of this bridge and they're seeing this area up on this hill. There's no buildings, nothing. It's just trees. And there was just something immediately about it that really stood out to Dr. Clark and his wife. And they noticed that the road they were on, there appeared to be like an access road that kind of splintered off the road they were on that appeared to go up into that forest, the Dark Entry Forest. And so they look at each other and they're like, hey, let's go up there. Maybe that's the place where we can find our spot for our second home. And so Dr. Clark pulls off the main road, goes on the access road, and he begins making his way up towards this kind of darkened forest area. And really quickly, the road itself was very overgrown. You know, at first it seemed like it was relatively well maintained, but the farther up they went towards this dark forest, the rougher it got, to the point where Dr. Clark couldn't even drive on it. There was too many potholes and everything. So they end up pulling the car over and parking. And at this point, they're actually in a bit of a clearing, and they can actually see up ahead of them where they parked. It looks almost like an entry point to the forest. The tree line is right in front of them, and there's kind of like a gap in the trees where this rugged road kind of continues into the forest, and they continue walking on foot towards the entry of this forest. And as they're walking, you got to picture where they are. Again, it's beautiful, scenic, very sunny, beautiful day. They're super excited, and they walk into the shade of the forest. And right away, it's like all the sunlight basically vanishes, but not in a spooky way, kind of like they lowered the brightness slightly, and it's very quiet. And, you know, the canopy in Dark Entry Forest is known for being really, really thick. And so not much light was pushing through, but it created almost like, it was like they were walking into a bubble. You know, it's just pure, unadulterated silence and peace. And as they're walking on this road, which quickly becomes mostly like a little path, it doesn't even look like a road at some point. It's just kind of like grass that's been pushed down. Clearly, not many people or anything is coming into this forest, at least not from this direction. And as they're walking along, they're looking around and they're like, this place is so beautiful. I mean, it was already beautiful, but this is especially beautiful. Like, they walked maybe a couple hundred feet into the forest, and off to their right is this apple orchard, untouched. No one's taking these apples. It's just like a wild apple orchard, and there's deer that are just eating the apples off the tree, and they're looking over at Dr. Clark and his wife, and they're completely unafraid. They don't see people, so this is not terrifying for them. Deer just eating their apples. And then, you know, on the other side of the road, there's these huge, you know, fields full of flowers that are, again, trees are everywhere, but there's all these flowers at the bases of the trees, you know, lilies and roses and yellow bitter tansies, or I think that's what they're called. So all these beautiful flowers. And then at some point, as they walked a little bit farther into this Dark Entry Forest, the sunlight that was poking through, it was hitting the ground in such a way that it was actually sparkling, because this forest was actually on a hillside, and there was this mineral called mica. If you're familiar, it's like this little translucent, it almost looks like kind of clouded glass. That's actually a mineral that comes from the ground. And when the sunlight hits it, it kind of looks like it sparkles. And so they're looking around at these wild animals that are unafraid of them, and flowers, and there's, you know, babbling brooks and streams. I mean, it's like out of a Disney movie. This is like a perfect place. And so by the time the couple came out of Dark Entry Forest, this is only, you know, like they walked around for maybe an hour or so. By the time they were coming out, they were completely sold that was going to be where they went ahead and bought their land to build a second home. And so they go back to New York City, and they put in the paperwork to buy the land. And so they put in the paperwork to buy the land, and they buy 1,000 acres in this forest, which it's ridiculous to imagine just casually buying 1,000 acres anywhere. But they did. They bought their 1,000 acres. And as soon as they had it, as soon as it was finalized, Dr. Clark began calling around to all these builders, local builders in Connecticut, that could help him build his home. And he had no intention of building some humongous home. They bought a huge amount of land, but they only wanted to build a small cabin. But despite the job being relatively simple And despite Dr. Clark offering quite a bit of money to anybody who was willing to go out there and build this for him, none of the builders would do it. They never really gave a straight answer to Dr. Clark about why they would not go into Dark Entry Forest, but universally, no one would do it. And so, Dr. Clark, he definitely was discouraged by that, but he just kind of chalked it up to, okay, so obviously it's kind of an isolated place. It's relatively hard to get into Dark Entry Forest, and where they had bought this land, it was pretty far into the forest. And so he just decided, okay, it just might not be worth it for them. It's logistically kind of a nightmare. They don't want to do it. And so Dr. Clark is undeterred, and he decides he will just build the house himself. Dr. Clark, he grew up on a farm in New Jersey. He was a very handy guy. He had built buildings before, so this was something he could do. And so over the next several months, every weekend, Dr. Clark would make his way on his own to Dark Entry Forest, and he would go in. And one critical thing I failed to mention at the beginning, which I'll mention now, is in addition to the beautiful, picturesque nature of Dark Entry Forest, it also was full of owls that were hooting all the time. So there's like this audio side of being in this forest, which is really intense. Like there's owls hooting constantly. And actually, Dr. Clark and Harriet thought it was really cute that these owls, it seemed like they were almost personally greeting them as they came into the forest. And so Dr. Clark, every weekend for several months, he would go into Dark Entry Forest and be greeted by the owls. And he would go to the land where the 1,000-acre land. And actually, he had identified this one kind of flat spot in the 1,000 acres that was good for building a home. And so the first thing he did over these several weekends he was out there is he just cut down this massive swath of hemlock trees, just kind of clearing out that flat area. And then he chopped up the trees he cut down into lumber, and he used that to build a rustic, simple 2-story cabin. And then after this cabin was built, kind of up on this hill, there happened to be another hill not too far away from the cabin where there was a freshwater spring right at the top. And so, Dr. Clark, he went up and laid piping from the freshwater spring down to his cabin. So they had fresh water in the cabin. And then down the hill from where the cabin was constructed was a small brook. And Dr. Clark, he found himself always going down and just staring into this beautiful brook because there were all these trout, because nobody fished out here. This is like an abandoned place, basically. There's all these trout just swimming around unencumbered, just leaping out of the water. If they even do that, I don't know if trout do that. I think they do. And so he ended up actually building a swimming pool right next to the brook, specifically so he could sit in the swimming pool and watch the trout. And so by Thanksgiving of that year, so 1906, by Thanksgiving, the property was done. The cabin had been built, everything was done. And so that holiday season, Dr. Clark and Harriet and their whole family would come out and they would spend the holidays, sitting in their pool, watching the trout and just having a wonderful time. And really for many years, every summer and every major holiday, the Clark family would come out to their beautiful Dark Entry cabin and they would stay there. And it was really perfect. That is until 1918. So in 1918, in the summer, Dr. Clark and Harriet were at their cabin and they were having a nice time when Dr. Clark got word that he was actually being called back to New York City for an emergency. Remember, he's an oncologist, so these things happen, and he was called back. And for whatever reason, Harriet, who normally likely would have joined him and just gone back to New York with him, she decided to stay. I mean, they've been coming here for years by this point, so she probably felt somewhat comfortable, although admittedly she was very unhappy about this. She didn't want to be there alone, but again, she decides to stay. But she tells Dr. Clark, because she didn't know how long he would actually be in New York, and he didn't really know either. But she said, "You got to promise me you'll be back here as soon as you possibly can." And Dr. Clark would tell her that, I'll do my best. I should be back here in maybe, a couple of days from now. And I promise you I will come home as soon as I possibly can. And so Dr. Clark packs up his things and he and his wife, they leave their cabin. They, walk their way down the trail, listening to the owls and looking at the mica sparkling on the ground. And they leave the forest and they make their way to a nearby train station, which actually was not that far away from the entry to the forest. And Harriet dropped off her husband and she watched, as he, boarded and it began taking off and he disappeared to go to New York. And Dr. Clark, as he's vanishing, traveling on this train, he's thinking to himself that, okay, I'll be in New York just for a couple of days. I'll be home. I'll be back in no time. Little did he know, over the course of time he was going to be in New York, his wife would endure something that is just truly horrifying. So, before I explain to you what happened after Dr. Clark left, you need to understand some history about this forest. History that Dr. Clark and Harriet did not look into before deciding to purchase these 1,000 acres. Because had they done the research into this area, they likely would not have bought the land. So there actually used to be a town that was settled in the Dark Entry Forest. It was called Dudleytown. And it was settled in the 1740s. And at first it was just a couple of families just getting by. But pretty quickly it grew to about 30 families and several structures and houses and the whole 9 yards. Like, it's a small community inside of this beautiful forest. And things were great, for a small town in the 1700s. Things were stable. But starting at the end of the 1700s, like in the 1790s up till about the 1800s, things started to go really, really badly in Dudleytown. And in fact, because of how badly it went, it earned this, the conclusion was that Dudleytown had to be cursed. And that lore had stuck around, which is actually why those builders refused to do the work for Dr. Clark, because they believed it was a cursed place. So this is what led to it being believed to be cursed. And I'll tell you, it's pretty creepy. So it started with the Carter family. So the Carter family was a big family inside of Dudleytown. And it was in 1790, 1792, there was this cholera epidemic that broke out in this small town, and 6 members of the Carter family died really suddenly from cholera. And the remaining members of the Carter family, which was significant, I think there was a dozen people still left, might have been a few less than that, but a pretty good chunk of people, they were so grief-stricken from the loss that they decided to just literally abandon their houses in Dudleytown and go back to New York City, where they happened to be from as well, same as Dr. Clark. But as soon as they got to New York, they were massacred by natives that lived in the area. And the only people that survived this massacre were 3 children, and the 3 children were kidnapped and never seen again. And so that was the start of bad things happening to people in Dudleytown. The next thing that happened is there was a guy named Hollister. We don't know his last name, but he either fell off a roof or he was pushed. We don't really know, but either way, he died. But he died on or near another person's home whose name was Tanner. Okay, so Hollister dies, and he dies on or near Tanner's home. And after Hollister died, which again, it was shrouded in mystery, Tanner, the owner of the home where this guy died, he began talking obsessively, and it's documented, obsessively about strange creatures lurking around the tree line inside of Dark Entry Forest, right around Dudleytown, every night. That's all he saw. So guy dies, and all of a sudden Tanner is noticing all these strange creatures. And he's telling everybody in town that there's something going on here. Nobody believed him. And so slowly, Tanner, every night, he would see whatever he was seeing, and it drove him insane, completely insane, to the point where he couldn't even function, and his daughter had to take care of him until he passed away. And as Tanner was losing his mind, his next door neighbor, whose name was Abel, began to talk as well about these creatures that were coming to the edge of the tree line surrounding Dudleytown most nights. And just like Tanner, Abel as well slowly lost his mind over these creatures because nobody believed him. And then all the way up until like just past the 1800s, so many people just randomly died in Dudleytown, some from disease for sure, but others, they'd just be found dead. And then many people as well began citing these strange creatures that were lurking all around. So by 1900, the only family that was still alive in Dudleytown was this family called the Brophies. And it was a fairly big family. And the mother, she suddenly died of cholera. The 2 sons, they were accused of theft in another town and then fled and vanished. And so literally it's down to John Brophy, the actual last person who's living in Dudleytown. And one night, apparently he didn't know why, but his cabin burned to the ground. And after his cabin, or while his cabin was burning, people were called out. They saw the smoke. They came out to put out this fire. And the last anyone saw of John, who's lost his whole family, he's lost everything, is he just turned and walked deeper into the forest and was never seen again. and no one could find him. That was it. And that was the last person who lived in Dudleytown. And that marked the moment that Dudleytown went from, still being occupied to being a literal ghost town. And you can actually look up the newspaper article that documented the moment when Dudleytown became a ghost town. No one lives there. And so that was about 1900. And you got to remember that only a few years later is when Dr. Clark and Harriet were taking their stroll through Litchfield County and up into Dark Entry Forest and saying, wow, this is the place for us. And they saw the ruins of Dudleytown. They walked past these old, what's the name? The basement of these homes, like the foundations, the crumbling foundations of these old homes. And there was all these remnants of this town that was still there. But much the way they viewed the owls as being kind of charming, they also viewed this rundown old town that was gone as kind of cute. And it made them want to stay there more. So they were aware of the town, but didn't do the research. Apparently Dudleytown was cursed, and that is where they bought their land. So, fast forward to 1918. So Dr. Clark, he's left for this emergency trip to New York, and it would turn out he was only needed in New York for 36 hours. It was, as short as he could have expected it to be. So less than 2 days later, keeping his word to his wife, he's back on a train, and he's heading back to that stop where Harriet had dropped him off near the Dark Entry Forest. And although this was rare that, Dr. Clark would leave his wife in the cabin, he expected her to be waiting for him at the train station. They didn't have an exact time that he was going to be there because it wasn't not entirely planned, but he had said, I'll be here in like 1 or 2 days max. And so he just kind of expected his wife to check the schedule and be at the train platform. But as he's pulling into the station, he sees his wife is not there. Now, this was not some huge cause for concern, but it was enough of a red flag that as, he's pulling into the station, Dr. Clark is thinking something feels off. And so he ends up going from the train station, and he actually walked the rest of the way. He didn't take a car or anything. He walked to that access road and made his way up to the entry of Dark Entry Forest. And as soon as he walked into the forest, so daylight out here, he steps into the canopy and it's dark again. And remember, it used to feel so welcoming and wonderful going into that forest. It was so peaceful, but now it has a different feel. He steps into the forest and suddenly it feels threatening. It feels ominous. And the owls that are hooting the whole time he steps in, it didn't feel like they were greeting him. It felt like they were telling him to leave. But he had to find his wife, and he's thinking she's up at the cabin. That's where we need to go. And so he begins kind of jogging, fast walking. He's getting a little nervous through the forest. And as he's moving through, the sounds of these owls are getting louder and louder and louder and more threatening until finally, when he gets to the clearing, when he can actually look up and see where he built his cabin up on this hill, it's like a cacophony of noise. It's just constant hooting, almost like it doesn't even sound like hooting. It's just a loud sound that's constant. And so Dr. Clark is starting to panic, but he gets even more panicked when he looks up at the cabin. He doesn't see his wife, but he sees the front door to this cabin is slightly ajar. And so Dr. Clark, he runs the rest of the way up the hill, owls hooting the whole time. He gets to the door and he's terrified. He knows there's something wrong here, but he gets the courage. He opens up the front door, and the second he steps into this home, which he has loved and spent years and years in with his family, he steps in and everything is different. Instead of it being peaceful, he now feels this almost high-pitched sound, like inside of his head for a second, and he's confused. And then he hears what sounds like maniacal laughter coming from the second floor. He doesn't see anybody on the first floor. He thinks it's his wife, and so he charges upstairs. He gets to the landing, and he sees the door to his bedroom, where he would expect his wife to be, is slightly open. And he can hear this laughter coming from inside of this room, this maniacal, crazy, loud, high-pitched laughter. And he's totally panicked. He goes to the door, and he opens it up. And there, in the back corner of the bedroom, is his wife. And she's in the fetal position, and her mouth has been opened as wide as it can go. And the laughter that he's hearing is coming out of her body, but her jaw isn't moving. Her chest is heaving, and this maniacal laughter is just coming out of her as she stares him dead in the eyes. And so Dr. Clark, he was so terrified at what he was seeing and all the hooting and all this craziness going on that he just turned and ran away. We don't know what happened to Harriet Clark over those 36 hours that her husband was gone, but something happened to her. And when she was taken away from this cabin, the only thing she would say is the strange creatures kept coming back. I kept seeing strange creatures. The same thing that all the people in Dudleytown had said that caused them to flee the town. And so we don't know exactly what became of Harriet, There is one account that says she was forever, she went to a mental hospital and stayed there until she passed. Another account says she went back to New York with Dr. Clark, where she took her life. But either way, the final thing was she claimed to have seen the strange creatures and lost her mind as well. Following this, so following the story, Dudleytown obviously took on, or Dark Country Forest really took on this unbelievable like legend. I mean, people knew about this story. They knew about the legend of the 1700s and 1800s, but this felt recent. I mean, this was a documented case of this doctor's wife. And so it spawned a lot of people going into Dark Country Forest to see what's out there. And lots of people who go into that forest before it became illegal reported feeling phantom hands slapping them on the back and feeling really intense pockets of cold air. And actually, the very famous paranormal couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren, in the 1970s, they went out and ran this special series about what happened in the Dark Country Forest. And they came out and said, absolutely, that forest is demonically possessed. And so I just want to say that as appealing as it is to go to this forest, I'm not kidding when I say it is totally illegal. And we've been put on notice by the Historical Society that basically encouraging people to go is grounds for a lawsuit. So please don't go. But you can totally Google it yourself. And that is the story of Dudleytown and the Clark family. So now I would love to just see what people are saying about this forest here. What do you guys think? What do you think's going on out there? Let's get some theories here. I'm going to read the theories. Man, I will say, as you guys are writing some stuff in the chat here, this is quite possibly one of the most intriguing stories we've done. I mean, we've covered a whole bunch of stuff ranging from, missing people and paranormal and all that stuff. This one feels like there's something else. There's something going on in this forest. And if you actually look at some of the photos people have posted illegally, these illicit photos, they go in and they'll take photos inside of this forest. There's absolutely some weird stuff people have captured on film that cannot be seen with the naked eye. So it's spooky, man. It gives me chills every time I think about that scene of Dr. Clark who's running through the forest. The owls are hooting like mad, and he's seeing the doors open, and he finds his wife like maniacally laughing in the bedroom. Like what a totally crazy scene that is. So crazy. So here we go. I'm reading through here. Fungal spore bloom. Maybe that's it. Skinwalkers. That's a theme. Great speaker, John. Thank you. Someone just joined and said, I'm literally 40 minutes late. Yeah, this is a terrible time to join. You missed the main thing. I don't know. Maybe this is a good time to say this. So lots of people ask me, I would say in comments and DMs, like, what is my stance on like the paranormal, let's say? Because certainly Dudleytown and this whole story and the whole lore around it, it certainly elicits, the idea that something paranormal could be going on. And my stance on that is I'm not like a hardliner, like, oh, paranormal is real. But what I am a hardliner about is, as a species, our understanding of everything is like this. Like, this is there's people in the chat that are going to eviscerate me for saying this, but I think we've only explored, if you look at like a map of the Earth, if you look at the Earth from outer space, like our biggest space exploration is like a millimeter. If you're looking at it from a camera or from I'm doing a horrible job. Here's all space. We've only gone like that far off of Earth, like with our best spaceships and our best people. Like we don't even know what's in our own galaxy. So the idea that we can just immediately dismiss anything paranormal because how could that be true? Why? How is that any more or less likely than anything else? We don't understand anything. So my stance is be curious and don't just shoot things down because socially that's what you're supposed to do. Like, believe what you want to believe because, frankly, it's just as believable as not believing it. That's my 2 cents. Please shout out Stacy Sommer. Well, there you go. I accidentally shouted you out. Boom. Nice work with that comment. That worked. Cool. All righty. So was that a good story? You have to say yes because it'll hurt my feelings if you say no. Now let's jump into some tears here. All right, so I mentioned at the beginning I'm half reading the comments here. Hold on. I want lots of positive reinforcement that was a great story. Good. Sweet. Nice. It's always interesting telling a story for the first time live. Anyhow, let's do a tier list, and please stick around because there's stuff going on here. There's a giveaway that's very easy to join. There's lots of stuff going on, so stick around. All right, as you can see on the screen here, we have a tier list. So if you're not familiar with how this works, we together are going to rank the movies you see at the bottom there as the best being top tier, and then so good and nice try, right? Like really good, medium, not so good. Okay. I'll start. Paranormal Activity. My God, did this movie scare me? This, even though it felt like, you know, it wasn't real. It felt real, and I remember being absolutely horrified of Paranormal Activity. If you haven't seen this, actually, this came out kind of a while ago. It feels somewhat recent, but it's really good. I would highly recommend. This is like the found footage style. It's so good. So Paranormal Activity, top tier all day. Got to be top tier for me. The next one, The Shining. This is the one that I need you all in the comments to give me your take. Should The Shining be top tier, so good, or nice try? Or is it so terrible, we're just going to leave it below? It doesn't even get ranked, okay? So top tier, so good, nice try, or leave it. Okay, let's hear it. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go into the next one, which is Cloverfield, which is another one of the ones I liked quite a bit. As you'll see, I'm a fan when it comes to horror movies, scary movies. I like the found footage stuff, even though it's fake or whatever, but it feels real. It makes you feel like it's real. Cloverfield definitely had that, so I liked Cloverfield. Not as much as top tier. I'm going to put that in so good. So Cloverfield's so good. Let's check out The Shining. How are people feeling about this? The Shining, top tier, top tier, top tier. No. Top tier, so good, medium, top tier. You know what? I'm seeing a lot of top tiers. It's so iconic that even if it's not as good as it once was when it first came out, because other stuff's come out, I think it's top tier as well. Scream, I don't know. No. I'm going to give it maybe a so, I got to be brutal here. I don't really like Scream. I think it's kind of cheesy. If we're talking about things that actually make you scared or are actually like, this is an attempt at scary stuff, I'm going to throw that in a nice try. I'm close to saying, you go in the garbage pail down below. I got to, put it in the garbage pail. Put it in the garbage pail. See ya. Yeah, get it out of here. Yeah, leave the M. That's all you get. The Exorcist. Here's another one for you all. I'd like you all to weigh in on The Exorcist, okay? I've seen it in pieces. That's horrible. I definitely have seen it in pieces because it's so famous. I've definitely seen it. It's a little dated. Gotta be honest. But yeah, that's yours to decide. The Exorcist, and then The Conjuring. I'll do Conjuring. I like The Conjuring. Not top tier though. I'm gonna go so good. All right. So last is The Exorcist. I see a so good top, so good. I'm seeing a lot of so goods. Throwing it in so good. We're sticking with so good. Thanks. And then just get that Scream off. Get it out of here. Get it out of here. There we go. Paranormal Activity, The Shining. That's the top tier. And then I would say Cloverfield is definitely the so good A. I'm going to put The Exorcist, then The Conjuring in the so good. I'm going to reverse those two. That's where I think we're at. How we feeling about this tier list? Pretty good? Good. Well, even if you said you don't like it, this is what we're doing. So there we go. Nice work, team. Nice work, fans. The Strange, Dark, and Mysterious. Teamwork here. Very cool. All right. So that was the tier list. And now the reason we did this is because now we're on to the next tier list, which is going to be painful for me because I need to rank things that are near and dear to my heart. I'm going to be brutally honest. We are going to just be really, really transparent and honest about what we think is the best of Ballin' merch. Okay. We're going to rank some Ballin' merch. Here's the merch we're going to be looking at. There's 4 pieces of merch. Okay. We have the top, which is, it's going to be confusing because we've now reversed top tier. It's now the middle. But must have is the new top tier. Top tier is the new middle. The good stuff, and then the trash can. That doesn't even exist, okay? So I'm going to do these because I think I owe it to you to be really honest, okay? So I'm going to judge these. The classic hoodie that I wear all the time, especially to the gym. This is like my gym hoodie. That's in a must-have. That's must-have. I got to be real. It's like the original cool piece of merch we came up with. So I'm putting that top tier, or I'm sorry, must have, not to be confused with top tier. Pretty good. Yeah. All right. Next is the Valentine's Day merch. Must have, immediate must have. Got to be real. It's a must have. Valley of the Headless Men. Probably the story, and if you haven't seen it, I think it's literally called the Valley of the Headless. Anyway, the Valley of the Headless Men is probably the story that I'm most proud of, the way we put it together, because there was so much information spread out across 100 years. We had to aggregate and create all these anecdotes to make the story make sense. And we had to commemorate it with merch, much the way we commemorated old Lung going rogue. That's a must-have. Like I said, I'm being real with you guys. It's a must-have. This is not biased at all, okay? Last but not least, make it even bigger. That's not big enough. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There. He gets his own category. It's above must-have. It's the lung tier. And the lung, in fact, they all go to the lung tier. All merch must-have and seagull lung tier. So that's my unbiased, honest assessment of our merch. And I'm sure it's identical to all of your tier lists for that. So, good work on the tier lists. So now, moving right along here, we got a little bit of time left. We have the Q&A. So go ahead and fire off some questions in the comments here, and we'll sort of do it live here. And I'll make sure that I'm only answering really like incendiary and inappropriate questions. That'll be really good for the stream. All right, let's see. I'm going to give it a second. Here we go. Yeah, I'm glad that you all agree that that was not biased, because that was what I was going for. All right, let's hear some questions, guys. Put them in the chat. I'm reading it right now. Can I tell you a joke, Mr. Ballen? You can, but candidly, I don't know if I'll see it. You had your moment. You should have just sent it. All right, here we go. This is from Fox King, the Fox King of Cereals. That's a cool name. Would you rather read a book or watch a movie, and why? Yeah, I don't know. I have like periods where I'm a big like voracious reader, and then I have other periods where I refuse to read at all. Currently, I'm in a little bit of a reading phase because my wonderful wife, Amanda, who actually might be watching this right now. Love you, Amanda, if you're out there with the kiddos next door here. She has become just like the most intense reader ever. Like she's read, I want to say like 25 books over the past like 40 days, maybe. Always reading, and it's starting to kind of rub off on me. And she recommended a book. It's called The Last One Left by Riley Sager. Just started it a couple days ago. It's like a horror, scary story. It's really good. I'm only about 90 pages in, so don't spoil it. Very good. So if you're looking into it, I haven't finished it yet, but The Last One Left by Riley Sager. Very cool. Thanks, Amanda. Love you. Great recommendation. So right now I'm going to go book over movie. And actually, I'm going to throw it back to you all. What do you think? Book or movie, and why? Book or movie, and why? Put it in the chat, and I'll come back and read some. All right. Next up, the question is coming in from Skell, Skelle. What would you want your tombstone to read? Cool dude. He died. Yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to read. Or, I know that's it. Cool dude, but he died. But he died. Cool dude, but he died. Maybe. We don't know. Where do we go? Where do you go after you die? We don't know. So, cool dude, but he died. Or did he? Because we don't know where we go when we die. The end. Or is it? Is what my tombstone's going to say. All right. Next. I'm seeing lots of books. That's cool. I wonder how many people are claiming books, but don't really mean it. Because candidly, I'm like 80% movie over book, if I'm being real. It's just right now, I'm in a book over movie state. Okay, next question. Here we go. This is from Scoops. My daughter Allison would like to know, how many languages does Seagull Lung know? Well, old Lung speaks Finnish, French, Italian, English, Portuguese, I think. He's close to half a dozen. And he's probably out there right now going rogue, looking for the like button, learning languages as he goes. As he encounters different villages in the forest, he has to learn their culture and learn their language in order to identify clues of where the like button has gone. So he's a quick learner, that old Lung. So I'm going to say he's at least past 12 at this point. Great question. Huge question. Great question. All right. Next one is a good question, and actually this is a question that's pretty real. This is from Tater Tot, cool name. Have you personally noticed that you might have changed how you do routines or daily tasks or activities because of stories you've covered? If so, could you give examples? And I think that what I'm taking from this is, as some of you may have noticed from like the strange, dark, and mysterious content that I cover, a lot of times it's touching on these horrible things that happen to people that oftentimes you can kind of avoid, not always, but a lot of times they're avoidable if you understood how to avoid them. And so I think people do, I'm guessing here, I don't know if this is true, they sometimes watch a lot of our content or listen to our content almost to learn what not to do or to learn what to look out for. And I will say, and this is not necessarily something that is good in my life, but it's the truth. I have become completely paranoid that someone's going to break into my house every single night, because the amount of times I have covered a story where somebody breaks into somebody's house is so like frequent. Even the stories that don't even make it to being produced. We research so many stories that don't actually make it. And we learn all the time about people getting into other people's homes. And in fact, there was this one story that I never covered because it was too dark. But you can look it up. There was this guy who, he was a serial killer. This is, I want to say in like the 80s or 90s. And this was in the United States. And I don't know the guy's name. I'm sure you can look it up. But I think he was obsessed with trees, like leaves and trees. And he began hoarding all these bags of leaves and like in his house, like stuffing them in his basement for no reason. And I might be combining two stories. So I'm sorry if this is actually two, but either way, I think it's the same one. After his obsession with trees began to wane, he began just going to random houses in his neighborhood, or maybe not his neighborhood, but in his town, and just checking the doors, broad daylight sometimes. And if it was open, he would go inside and he would kill whoever was inside. And he did it long enough that he managed to take down like quite a few people. Like he killed a lot of people. And then he began stuffing, I think, leaves in their houses as well. But the only reason he targeted those people is because their door was unlocked. Now, you can't leave your house locked all the time, but I would say that I am hyper aware of doors locked all the time. Like my house is always locked and I'm on edge, like ready for somebody to come in my house. I'd say it's fortunate I have Navy SEAL training that hopefully will protect me if somebody comes in the house. But yeah, high paranoia from these stories about break-ins. And someone just threw out, what's your biggest fear? Oh, Maddie. I'm sorry, I didn't see your name. That's probably it, candidly. Somebody breaking into the house and me not being prepared for it. So there you go. That has changed my life for sure. Next is from Shan's Fishy World. When did you know you wanted to be a Navy SEAL? Yeah, honestly, I kind of botched a lot of my early adulthood and like my teenagerhood. I just kind of blew off school. And if you've seen some of the interviews I've done recently on the Sean Ryan podcast and also on Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast, I talk about it at length. But I kind of like had a lot of opportunity to do great stuff with my life, but didn't, and just kind of was an idiot and got in fights and partied and was just kind of a jerk. And it was at the moment when I had dropped out of college after one semester and I'm in my mom's basement, like just realizing the gravity of my situation, that I've blown it. Like I'm now home, unemployed, not in college. My parents hate me. Like, what am I going to do? That was when I kind of had my moment, my epiphany that I wanted to turn my life around. And I had been thinking about the military. I had some family friends who actually were Navy SEALs. I went up talking to them about it. And before long, I just felt like, man, if I could just become a SEAL and go through the pipeline and become a Navy SEAL, no one's going to remember that I was this complete idiot that like botched my life. They'll think that, wow, he really got his act together. And I'd be doing something that I really wanted to do. You know, being a Navy SEAL was like a really hard. I wanted to join the military and serve, but I saw the SEAL teams as being this great challenge within the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to serve. The SEALs were the big challenge. I could kind of reinvent myself if I succeeded, and I did. So 19 years old in my mom's basement, fresh out of being dropped out of college, practically flunked out of college, just a complete problem child. That was the moment that I was like, wait a minute, I should take some ownership of my life. And that's when I did. So there you go. That was a big moment for me. And I will say, when you have moments like that, you actually are kind of aware they're life-changing, at least in my experience. I kind of knew that, okay, that's the end of my crappy behavior. I'm going to get myself together. And I did. And I've kept on the course as much as I could. Thankfully, my wife, Amanda, has also kept me on the straight and narrow for the last 10 plus years. So it's definitely thanks to her too that I've continued that path. Okay. Here we go. What's the latest / greatest? We have to wrap this up here in a few minutes here. What's the latest, greatest shenanigans your cats have gotten into, by G Vin? Thank you for the question, G Vin. So I have 3 cats. And actually, while we're at it, are you team cats or team dogs? Put that in the chat. Team cats, team dogs. I gotta say, I'm team cats. It's true. I have 3 cats of my own. I've always had cats. I love dogs, but I'm team cats. And lately, the shenanigans my youngest cat, Chewy, has gotten into is he projectile vomits. It's great. Just before here, I was wiping some vomit off the walls. That's great. It's a nice new feature for Chewy. So that's the shenanigans he's gotten into lately. Yeah, so team both. I see a lot of both. I didn't say both was an option, okay, because I do both. That's not cool. You got to do team cats or team dogs in the chat. I'm team cats, like 55%, 60% team cats, 40% team dogs. Alrighty, here we go. We gotta move along here. So the giveaway for these incredible, is it on the screen? For the incredible Lungy posters that we're giving away 20 of, which, by the way, it's so easy to register for these. All you have to do is right now in the description of this live stream, there is a link to our Discord server, which is free. It's free. It's legitimately free. Pinned comment, not in the description. It could be in the description, but it's definitely a pinned comment right now. Click on that if you're not already signed up for our Discord server. That'll prompt you to join our Discord server. Again, it's free, really free. Then once you're in the Discord server, and don't worry if you've never been in one, just click that link. It'll prompt you through everything. It's very easy. On the left-hand side, there's literally a tab that says giveaways, which you can see right here. You click on that, and then where it says free merch, sign up for a chance, blah, 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 where the mouse is right now, that little symbol, you click on it. The end. That is all you have to do. It costs you nothing other than about 30 seconds of your time, and you are automatically entered to win one of 20 of these amazing one-of-a-kind Seagull Long movie posters, and they will be given away like in the next hour. So go do it right now if you haven't already. Get yourself signed up, and hopefully you get one of these sweet Seagull Long posters. Also, again, guys, if you want to go back to camera 2, remember, the merch right now is live on ballenstudios.com. All you got to do is go click and go get the stuff you want. I got to be honest, I'm pretty confident this stuff is going to sell out really quickly. Not a gimmick. I really think it's going to sell out fast. So go get it done. ballenstudios.com to get your new Seagull Lung merch, the Rogue Seagull Lung merch. And also, last thing, we have an amazing newsletter that just went out. I know people are like, "Well, what's a newsletter?" This one's amazing. Our team created a beautiful newsletter where we give away information way earlier than other people get. Like, you will get early access to all this cool stuff. Go to ballenstudios.com. This is how you sign up for the newsletter. And you just scroll down to the bottom, slap your email into the box that's right there. There it is. Do you want more Mr. Ballen in your life? Throw in your email, hit send, boom, you're signed up for the newsletter. And if you hate it, just unsubscribe. We are putting real effort into making that newsletter worth your time. It's simple, it's minimal writing, it's a lot of graphics, and it's easy stuff to click. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, sign up for the newsletter. Get yourself signed up for the giveaway for the 20 Lungy posters. And just continue tuning in week over week. I love you guys so much. This was so much fun. I hope you enjoyed it. The video for today is also going out like literally in a minute, 2 minutes. The new video, the sick new like Sunday release, it's going out in about 2 minutes. So tune in for that as well. It's 1 minute from now. So go enjoy the video. Thank you all so much. See ya.
Today's story is about a murder, but it starts to feel like it's sort of a typical true crime case until you get to the end. I'm telling you right now, Late on the night of October 13th, 2008, a 43-year-old woman named Hua Saihui sat in her parked car in a dark, desolate area off the side of Highway 61 in New Taipei City, Taiwan. Hua rolled down her driver's side window and then turned the engine off. And for a second, she just sat there and let the warm breeze blow in on her face. It wasn't often that she got a moment alone because she had 3 kids who all lived at home. So she just took a moment to enjoy the silence. And then eventually, she turned to the center console and she grabbed a piece of paper that was sitting there. And she tore the paper into tiny pieces and then tossed them out the open window. But when she did that, she didn't realize that the breeze kind of blew back in at the same time, and a few of those ripped up pieces actually found their way back inside of her car and settled in the pocket on the driver's side door. A little while later, around 3 a.m., a Coast Guard officer drove along Highway 61 doing his regular nighttime patrol. He went under an overpass and into an area where there weren't very many streetlights. And there, in the relative darkness, he saw something that was pretty odd. There was this gray sedan parked half on and half off the road. Intrigued, the Coast Guard officer pulled up behind the car, parked, and got out to investigate. The sedan's lights and engine were both off, and so the officer wondered if maybe this car had been abandoned. But as he got closer, he saw that the driver's side window was wide open. Now again, it was pretty dark, but the officer could make out the shape of what appeared to be a woman sitting inside the car in the driver's seat. And so the Coast Guard officer took out his flashlight to wake this person up, but when he shined the light into the car, he immediately reeled back in horror. Because the woman was not asleep. Her entire head and her chest were covered in blood. A few minutes later, a police officer named Guo Huiwen arrived on the scene along with a small team of other police officers and several EMTs. The EMTs quickly determined what basically everybody on scene already knew, which was the woman inside the car was dead. She had a small circular wound right below her left ear that authorities immediately recognized as a bullet wound. Officer Guo immediately pushed his men out to secure the scene. And then once the cordon was in place, they began investigating. The first thing Guo did was just to look more closely at the woman's body. He saw there was a bullet casing on the ground nearby, and also what appeared to be some bullet fragments in the car, like little bits of shiny metal, like copper. But there was no gun. And so at this point, Officer Guo and his team realized they were very likely dealing with a murder. But as he stood there sort of taking it all in and looking at the car and the body, he started to realize that the whole scene just seemed off. First, there were no skid marks behind the car's tires, so it appeared like the woman must have pulled over in a controlled way, not like she'd been, forced off the road by another car. Second, her window was all the way down. The driver's side window was completely down, which meant either she'd been driving with the window down to begin with, or after she had pulled over, or while pulling over, she had rolled it down. And then thirdly, there was no evidence of a struggle, or really any sign that this woman had been panicked in any way before she was ultimately shot. I mean, she hadn't even dropped her phone or taken off her seatbelt. And so overall, it just sort of seemed like this woman had been remarkably calm in her final moments, like she had no idea she was about to be killed. And this made Officer Guo think that whoever shot her was very likely somebody she knew and trusted. And so Guo knew he needed to identify this woman and then determine who was close to her. So he took down the license plate number of the car, and he was about to go run it through a system to see who the car belonged to, but suddenly another officer came running over, and they told him they'd found something really weird inside the car. They weren't sure if what they found was related to the crime, but in the pocket on the driver's side of the door, they'd found 4 small scraps of paper, and each scrap had what looked like numbers or word fragments handwritten on them. They said 65, Dao Leo, Z, and Da. Now, none of these fragments appeared to have any meaning on their own. They likely, needed to be a part of a bigger piece of paper to make sense. In fact, honestly, the words were just pieces of words rather than actual full words themselves. And also, when they began sort of arranging the 4 pieces to see if they could, find meaning in these words and this number, they couldn't do it. It just was all sort of nonsense. And so Officer Guo, he figured these scraps were likely just garbage, But as a precaution, he had his officers bag them up as evidence just in case. Let's take a moment to say thank you to our sponsor, Sherwin-Williams. Choosing a paint color can be easy when you have the right tools. Sherwin-Williams offers several solutions for finding the perfect hue, including color chips, peel and stick samples, and color-to-go samples, so you can try color before you buy and find your perfect color with confidence. Your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store delivers color and project expertise, a product for every need, and personalized customer experience. So my wife and I have been renovating our basement to make it our primary hangout space for the family. And in the basement is a custom entertainment center that we had installed, and it was supposed to get painted by professional painters, until my wife said, well, hey, why don't we make this our big project over spring break to paint it ourselves? Now, of course, I was thrilled, as any good husband would be, and so what we did is we went to our local Sherwin-Williams store, and let me tell you, the entire experience really was awesome. The staff was very knowledgeable, and they helped us pick the right paint color and finish, the amount of paint, all the supplies we would need, and they even gave us some how-to painting tips. And so my wife and I get home from Sherwin-Williams and we start our one-day project that quickly evolved into a multi-day project. But at the end of those days, it came out great, and we could not have done it without the help of Sherwin-Williams. And now the entertainment center in the basement is the focus piece of the room, and I can proudly say we did that thanks to Sherwin-Williams. Head to swsamples.com to order color samples for your next project. Everyday life is full of moments that you plan for, and also moments that just happen, often when you least expect them. Whether it's part of your normal routine or something unexpected, Amazon is where you go for everyday essentials, making shopping simple and dependable. From running out of household basics to last-minute surprises, Amazon's great deals and low prices on everyday essentials make it easier to handle whatever life throws your way. Everything is in one place, so there's no extra stress or jumping through hoops when time is already tight. Whether it's something you buy regularly or something you suddenly realize you need right now, Amazon makes it easy to find what you're looking for quickly and at a price that feels good. It's straightforward, dependable shopping that makes everyday moments feel more manageable with less stress, fewer steps, and more confidence that your money is well spent. Shop Amazon and save on essentials. Save the everyday. A few hours later, Officer Guo, along with a member of his team, walked into this huge apartment complex in New Taipei City that was about 40 miles away from where they had found the woman inside of the gray sedan earlier that morning. They went to a specific apartment and they knocked on the door. And after a moment, a middle-aged man opened the door up, and he looked very surprised to see police standing at his door. Officer Guo asked this man if his name was Xu Bicheng. And the man nodded and said yes. By this point, Officer Guo and his partner had identified the murder victim. She was 43-year-old Hua Sai-hui. And when they'd started looking into Hua's relationships, they'd learned that she lived in this apartment with her 3 kids and the man who had opened the door, Xu Bicheng. He was her ex-husband. Even though the couple had actually gotten divorced 5 years earlier, they had ultimately decided to continue living together and co-parenting. As Hua's ex-husband, Xu was an obvious person of interest in this murder. But at this point, Officer Guo wasn't sure how much Xu even knew. So he had to be careful how he approached the conversation. Officer Guo started by introducing himself and his partner, and then asked Xu if he had spoken to his ex-wife recently. And Xu shook his head and said he actually hadn't spoken to her since the previous night. But he did say that their last conversation had definitely been kind of weird. He said that the previous night, around 8:45 p.m., Hua had left to go to this meeting with a pawn shop owner on the opposite side of the city. He said that she owed this pawn shop owner a lot of money, and they were supposed to be discussing a repayment plan. But around 9:30 p.m., while she was on her way to this meeting, Xu said that Hua had actually called him to say she was out on Highway 61 and another car was now following her. Xu had told her that very likely this was just somebody driving a similar route as her, like this was not a cause for concern. And so ultimately, Hua had sort of agreed and said okay and hung up. And according to Xu, he tried calling Hua back a bit later, but she hadn't picked up. Xu said he actually called Hua an additional 10 more times after this, but She never answered, and so Xiu said he really didn't know what became of his ex-wife. He didn't know how the meeting went. He didn't know where she was. Now, after hearing this, Officer Gua's first reaction was sort of to be like, that's absurd. If Xiu knew that Hua was potentially being followed, at night no less, while she's out by herself, going to this relatively high-stakes meeting with this pawn shop owner, and then she suddenly stops answering her phone, why wouldn't Xiu have eventually called the police? Or at least tried to go look for her? Instead, he'd just called Hua a bunch of times, and then when she didn't answer, he just shrugged the whole thing off. The mother of his kids, he just sort of said, oh, no big deal. It just felt like a really bizarre way for somebody to react to this situation. So, Officer Gua watched Xiu very carefully as he told him, what happened. He said he was very sorry, but early that morning, they'd found his ex-wife murdered inside of her car on the side of the highway. When Xiu heard this, his eyes went wide and he began to tremble. And, from Gua's perspective, it looked like sort of a shocked response, a genuine shocked response that he can't believe what he's being told. But he also really couldn't read the guy. He couldn't tell if this was genuine or if he was just performing. Either way, Gua knew what he needed to do next was follow up on Xiu's story and see if maybe he could poke some holes in it. Following this interview, Gua and his team asked the manager of the apartment complex for any available surveillance footage so they could see if Hua really did leave the apartment when Xiu said she did. And the manager was able to recover some footage from inside the apartment complex elevator. And while it did prove that Hua left around 8:45 p.m., like Xiu had said, it also showed something else that struck Officer Gua as kind of strange. In the video, Hua rode down the elevator, supposedly on her way to meet with this pawn shop owner, but for some reason, her ex-husband, Xiu, rode the elevator with her. And during this ride, Xiu kissed Hua for 8 seconds straight, and then hugged her until the elevator stopped and the doors opened. Now, to most people, this would just look like a sort of normal, tender moment between a loving couple. But it was odd in this case, really for 2 reasons. First, because Hua and Xiu were divorced. As far as Gua understood, they were definitely not a romantic couple at all anymore. And then secondly, it was also weird because in Taiwanese culture, public displays of affection are very taboo, especially among older generations. Like, it would be really uncommon for a middle-aged couple to kiss and hug pretty much anywhere except inside their own home. So, Officer Gua felt like, the only reason that made sense for Xiu to behave the way he had on the elevator was if he knew something bad was about to happen to his ex-wife. And as they continued investigating Xiu's story, they found more problems with it. They learned that the pawn shop owner did exist, and Hua did owe him a lot of money, but when they actually spoke to him, he said he had not been planning to meet with Hua on the night of her death. He didn't know what she was talking about. Police also got access to surveillance footage from Highway 61, where Hua's body had been found. Now, the cameras didn't cover the part of the road where the murder actually took place, but police were able to get footage of Hua driving along the highway at 9:30 p.m., the time Xiu said she had told him she was being followed. But on this video, there was clearly no other car following Hua. Now, it was technically possible that Hua had lied to her ex-husband Xiu for some reason, but to Officer Gua, it seemed much more likely that Xiu was now lying to him and making up, the story about the car following his ex-wife. After learning all of this, Officer Gua and his team went back and looked at all the surveillance footage from the apartment complex, and they also got access to Xiu's cell phone GPS records to see if they could track his movements on the night of the murder. But what they found really only complicated things, because according to the footage and Xiu's cell phone pings, he was inside of his apartment all night. There was no way he was the one who shot Hua. But to Officer Gua, this didn't mean Xiu was innocent. He wondered if maybe Xiu had hired someone to commit the murder on his behalf. He didn't know, but he just felt like Xiu had to be involved. But that theory still left a lot of unanswered questions. Like, why would Xiu have wanted Hua dead in the first place? And why would Hua have calmly pulled over and opened her car window for a hitman potentially? And so Officer Gua thought about it for a little bit, and then he had an idea. Maybe the person Xiu hired wasn't a stranger. Maybe the hitman was somebody Hua knew and trusted. Several months later, Officer Gua and one of his teammates were sitting inside of an office in a high-rise building in New Taipei City. They were in front of this huge desk, and behind this desk was the man who worked in this office. And he was Hua's brother. So Officer Gua and his team were still working off the idea that whoever killed Hua likely knew her personally. So they'd spent the last few months methodically tracking down and interviewing everyone in her cell phone contacts list. Now, so far, they had not found any new suspects. But they had learned some pretty interesting stuff. Apparently, Hua had not just been in debt to that pawn shop owner. She also owed money to multiple banks, to friends, to family members. She even owed money to some very shady black market lenders. Altogether, she had the equivalent of nearly $500,000 in debt. And knowing all of this actually made Hua and her ex-husband Xiu's relationship make more sense. Several people had told Gua that the reason Hua and Xiu had gotten divorced was not because they wanted to. It was because Hua's credit was terrible because of all this debt, and Xiu wanted to keep his finances separate from hers. And so by all accounts, the couple, despite being divorced, were still very much in love, and they were both devoted to each other and to their kids. And so this new information had kind of left Officer Gua and his team floundering, because Xiu had initially seemed so suspicious, but Gua still didn't have any hard evidence against him, and now he didn't even seem to have a motive for him. So now, as Gua sat inside of this office across from Hua's brother, he just hoped that some new piece of information would come to light. Gua and his partner asked the brother to please tell them everything he knew about Hua, her marriage, and anything else he thought might be relevant. The brother nodded and started talking. But pretty quickly, what he was saying just sounded a lot like all the other stuff that Gua already knew. Like, this was not new information, it was the same as always. And so as the brother just kind of began to talk, Gua's eyes sort of left the brother and began wandering around the room. And eventually, Gua's gaze landed on a bookshelf behind the brother, behind the desk. He noticed there was a piece of paper sticking out from between two books on the shelf. Now, Gua could only see a little bit of it, but he could tell that there was handwriting on the paper that looked familiar. And so, without saying anything, like while the brother is still talking, Gua got up, walked around to the bookshelf, and he pulled out that piece of paper. And right away, as he's looking at it, his heart began to race, because he saw that the handwriting on this piece of paper was the same handwriting that were on those 4 little scraps of paper that were found at the crime scene, those pieces of paper that were sort of ruled out as trash. He's seeing this is definitely the same handwriting. But more than that, Gua is seeing that literally the actual words or portions of words and the number that were on those fragments are literally on this piece of paper. Clearly, he's looking at a duplicate of whatever document was in the car that got ripped up. He only had 4 little pieces before. Now he's looking at the full copy of that document. And as Gua looked over this document, it was like everything just snapped into place. Those fragments that he saw, those things that were found in the car that now have been laid out in this document, those were bits and pieces of street names and addresses. The full message that Gua was now looking at was actually a set of geographical directions. And the directions would lead whoever was following these directions to the actual location where Hua was murdered. And so after this discovery, the police very quickly figured out what happened to Hua, like who the mastermind was behind her murder. But amazingly, the mastermind was not Hua's brother, despite this document being found in his office. No, it would turn out that the story of Hua's murder was far darker and far more tragic than anybody could have imagined. It all began 1 month before Hua's death. That was when 3 people who all wanted Hua dead met up. That was Hua's brother, Hua's ex-husband, and the mastermind. And the three of them, once they got together, they began formulating a plan. Now, what they all decided was none of them wanted to get their hands dirty, so they would hire a hitman. They decided that once they had this hitman, they would kill Hua in a neutral location. They would shoot her on the side of the highway. And they chose a date for her execution that was convenient, a time when that section of the road would be basically empty and also was an area where there were no cameras and few streetlights. And so on the night that Hua is going to be executed, the reason Hua's ex-husband, Xiu, rode down the apartment elevator with her and hugged her and kissed her in this big display of affection was because he knew what was going to happen to her. He was basically saying goodbye. And then after Hua left the apartment, Xiu contacted Hua's brother, who then called the hitman. And then the hitman used the directions the brother had written out for him, those same directions that Hua had found in his office. The hitman used those to get to the location where they were going to kill Hua. And when he got there, he just pulled off to the side of the road and he waited. A little while later, the hitman saw Hua's gray sedan pass by him and come to a stop on the side of the road. And so at this point, the hitman got out of his car, he walked up alongside Hua's car, her window was down, he pulled out a gun, and he shot her. It would turn out the third person who met up with the ex-husband and the brother who wanted Hua dead, who was the mastermind behind Hua's execution, was Hua herself. The reason Hua had those directions in her car that she ultimately ripped up at the end and tried to dispose of is because she needed directions to go to the place where she was going to get killed. It's why the hitman got out of the car, walked right up and killed her with no fight. She had rolled down the window and was waiting. Police later determined that Hua had taken out a life insurance policy on herself that was worth so much money it would pay off all of her debt and leave her family with a lot of money left over. She'd planned her own murder as a sort of self-sacrifice in the hopes of giving her family a better life. She'd ultimately convinced her ex-husband and brother to help in exchange for a cut of the money. But her plan didn't really work out. Hua's death was ruled a suicide, not a homicide, so the life insurance company didn't pay out anything to her family. Xiu, Hua's brother, and the hitman all faced a number of charges, including facilitating suicide and fraud. They each received between 6.5 and 7 years in prison. Hey everyone, just a reminder, I'm going on tour this year, which means if you go, you can experience never before heard stories from me live and in person. We did this in 2024 and people loved it. So get your tickets today at tour.ballenstudios.com right now before they sell out. That's tour.ballenstudios.com. I can't wait to see you all at the shows. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. Today's video is a collection of 5 fan favorite stories that are all places you can't go and people who went anyways. Now, these 5 fan favorites have all been completely re-edited for today's episode, so even if you may have heard or seen them before, this will still feel like a brand new experience. Also, make sure you pay close attention the whole time to what you're seeing on the screen, because at some point in this episode, there's going to be a secret image embedded somewhere on the screen. If you were the first person to see it and comment it and give the timestamp of where you saw it in the video, and if that's correct, we will pin your comment. But before we get into today's 5 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please tell the like button that you made a nice fresh batch of lemonade, but don't tell them it's actually bleach. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's
Pelican Valley is a beautiful, remote section of backcountry in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. Its meandering meadows and creeks and 360-degree view of the mountains make it appear like the perfect place to camp out under the stars. But unlike other areas of the park, Pelican Valley requires a special permit if you intend to stay the night. And before Yellowstone Park rangers give you this permit, they remind you that Pelican Valley is a very dangerous place. And in general, you should only be out there with groups of at least 4 people. On July 28, 1984, 25-year-old Brigitte Fredenhagen, along with her brother Andreas and her sister-in-law Janko, arrived at Yellowstone National Park. That night, they stayed in one of the park's more established campgrounds called Grant Village. The following day, they headed out to one of the park's famous hot springs called the Norris Geyser. That afternoon, before heading back to their campsite, they made a pit stop at the park ranger's office so Brigitte could apply for a Pelican Valley permit. Her plan was to spend the following night in the valley. When they went in the office, the rangers believed all 3 of them were applying for a permit, and so they weren't asking that many questions. They were just kind of going through the routine. And then when Brigitte said, "No, it's just going to be me applying for a permit," they actually immediately tried to dissuade her and said, "This is a really bad idea. Nobody goes into Pelican Valley on their own." But Brigitte assured them that she was an experienced camper, she understood the risks, and she still wanted to go on her own. And Andreas and Janko, who were standing behind her, kind of echoed that sentiment and said, "No, she's really good. She knows what she's doing." The park rangers were not thrilled with her plan, but they ultimately decided, you know what, if she wants to go, she can go. They just asked her to show them on a map where she intended to camp, so if they needed to, they could come and check on her and make sure she was okay. And so she pointed to a section on the map, and they handed her her permit, and then she, along with Andreas and Janko, left the office and headed back to their campsite. The next morning, the trio got up early and they hopped in the car and drove to the Pelican Valley trailhead. They parked their car, they got out, and they began walking into Pelican Valley as a group. After a few miles, as planned, the group stopped, at which point Andreas told Brigitte that they were going to head back now and that they would meet her tomorrow at the trailhead where they parked the car. They said their goodbyes, and then Andreas and Janko turned around and started walking back towards the car, and Brigitte carried on into the wilderness. The following day, Andreas and Janko arrived at the trailhead to meet Brigitte, but she didn't show up. And after a couple of hours, they grew very concerned, so they called park rangers and asked them, have you seen Brigitte? And they said, no, but we'll go take a look. The area Brigitte had told park rangers she was going to be camping was inside of a densely forested area right next to a large meadow, which meant as park rangers came up to check on her, they would not actually be able to see her until they were practically right on top of her. So the park rangers made their way through the meadow and into the forest before they started yelling for Brigitte, but she didn't yell back, and then at some point they reached the area where she had said she was camping, and sure enough, they found her tent. But it was a very odd scene. When they came up to the tent, they could see there was a big tear in one side. When they poked their heads down and looked inside, all of her belongings in the tent were undisturbed. There was a foam sleeping mat right in the middle, and then to the right of the mat was a flashlight that had been turned off. On the left side of the pad was a tape player with headphones that she must have been listening to before bed. It had been left on until the batteries ran out. At the foot of the pad was her backpack, inside of which were all of her clothes that had been neatly packed inside of Ziploc bags to mask her scent. Also in the pack was a wilderness survival guide with a page flipped down that was a diagram of how to string your food up into the trees so no animals can get to it. The rangers looked around the backside of the tent about 2 meters away, and they found her sleeping bag perfectly flat on the ground as if it had been laid out to dry in the sun. But upon closer inspection, they found it had 2 puncture marks, one that was up near the neck of the bag and the other that was near the torso, but there was no blood on the bag. At this point, rangers started to speculate that this could have been an animal attack, but they were confused at the general tidiness of the scene. Typically, when an animal attacks a person, it looks like a bomb went off in the area where the attack occurred, and this campsite was very, very neat. As the rangers continued to walk around the campsite looking for clues and yelling out for Brigitte, they found a barely discernible drag tail a couple of meters away from the sleeping bag that was leading west into the forest and up a hill. And so the rangers started following this trail, and they got about 20 meters away from the camp when they discovered Brigitte's cooler lying on the ground on its side, and whatever food had been in there was now gone. There was some string laying next to it, so it looked like it had been strung up in the trees, but someone or something had gotten it down. From the cooler, the rangers continued walking along this drag trail another 20 meters or so up a hill hill where they discover a woman's sweater on the ground that's been torn up and there's blood on it. So at this point, the Rangers get their rifles up and they keep walking another 40 meters up and over the hill down into this clearing in the woods where they find Brigitte, or what was left of her. No one knows exactly what happened to Brigitte, but the theory based on physical evidence is this. After setting up her campsite, Brigitte climbed inside of her tent, got inside of her sleeping bag, and then put her headphones on to listen to music. A little while later, a male grizzly bear discovered Brigitte's cooler strung up in the trees about 20 meters away. And apparently, Brigitte did not string it high enough because the bear was able to reach up and pull it down. After the bear ate the food inside of the cooler, it was still hungry, so it began looking around the area for more to eat. It's believed this bear was so accustomed to human traffic in the area that when he stumbled across Brigitte's tent, he wasn't scared. In fact, he thought, there's food inside of there. There's people I can eat. So this bear quietly lumbers over to the side of the tent. It reaches up and cuts the nylon with its paw, and then it puts its head inside and bites down on Brigitte's skull and begins dragging her away. There was no sign of a struggle in or near the tent, indicating that Brigitte was most likely asleep, or maybe she just could not hear the bear because she still had her headphones in. She was dragged 80 meters by her skull to that clearing where she was consumed. An attack like this is exactly the reason why Pelican Bay is considered so dangerous, because it's full of grizzly bears. And even though grizzly attacks on humans are incredibly rare, most people do not understand just how horrific they are when they do occur. Grizzly bears don't really try to kill their prey before they eat them. Instead, they focus on pinning them down and then getting them under their body weight so they can't go anywhere, at which point they can eat them at a leisurely pace. Some say grizzlies actually prefer to eat their prey while they're still living, which is why so often in grizzly attacks you see the arms and legs eaten first and then the head and torso. This is a method that keeps the victim alive a little bit longer. Unfortunately, there was so little left of Brigitte that investigators could not pinpoint a time of death. However, because this bear broke normal behavior and intentionally targeted a human, there's a good chance he savored that meal. On April 28, 2000, a 24-year-old named Yuri Lipsky was standing in front of a cafe in Dahab, Egypt, overlooking the Red Sea. He had traveled all the way to the Sinai Peninsula from Moscow in order to film himself swimming through the Arch, but now it was looking like that probably wasn't going to happen. The Arch is an 85-foot-long underwater tunnel that connects a massive sinkhole right on Dahab's shoreline called the Blue Hole to the Red Sea. To get to the Arch, you need to enter the Blue Hole directly and descend straight down 181 feet, where you'll reach the top of the tunnel on the northeast side. But there's a catch. If on your descent you happen to miss the ceiling of this arch, which apparently it's pretty easy to do, you run the risk of going too deep. Now, going too deep does not mean you're going to miss the tunnel altogether. The arch actually starts at 181 feet, but then goes all the way down to 393 feet. So it's a huge, huge opening. The risk of going too deep has to do with how your body responds to the type of gas you're breathing. For those who are unfamiliar with diving, generally speaking, you have two types of dives. There's recreational diving, where you breathe the same air that you breathe on the surface. They literally jam air directly into scuba bottles. You breathe that, and you go down to 130 feet. That's the recommended bottom depth that you would go down breathing regular air. And then there is technical diving, where you breathe a special mixture of gases. Typically, it's going to be a mixture of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen that allow you to go below 130 feet. This type of diving is exponentially more dangerous and requires all sorts of additional training. Because the minimum depth you would need to go to in order to access the arch is 181 feet, that puts you well in the technical diving range, which means you should be diving mixed gas and have special training and equipment. But year after year, people try to dive down to the arch and go through it on regular air. And year after year, people die doing it. When your body absorbs too much nitrogen, you can get something called nitrogen narcosis, which is a lot like being drunk. And in extreme cases, divers who get this have been known to remove their mouthpiece and inhale water, believing they are actually on the surface. Below 130 feet, your body absorbs nitrogen much faster, and regular air is a whopping 78% nitrogen. So the risk of getting nitrogen narcosis is exponentially higher if you're breathing regular air below 130 feet. Also, oxygen can become toxic the deeper you go in the water column. It can lead to blackouts and convulsions that if you don't have someone there to literally physically move you up in the water column, you won't recover from it and you'll die. Regular air contains 21% oxygen, which is a lot of oxygen. So if you're diving regular air below 130 feet, you are at an increased risk of developing O2 toxicity. Now, to be clear, it is possible on regular air to dive down to 181 feet and make it through the arch and come out the other side and be just fine. But you're realistically at 181 feet pushing the absolute boundary of what you can get away with on regular air. Below 200 feet, you're probably dead. So if you're attempting to swim through the arch on regular air, you need to be paying very close attention to your depth as you descend so that you don't miss the arch and accidentally drift down below 181 feet to the very deadly 200 feet and beyond. So earlier in the day, Yuri had gone down to the edge of the blue hole and he had found one of the diving instructors that taught inside the blue hole. His name was Tarek Omar, and he asked him if he'd be willing to take him down to the arch to help him film himself going through the arch. And Tarek said, yes, but I need to train you for 2 weeks before you're going to be considered qualified to do that. And you need a special setup with a special gas mixture to do this dive. And Yuri was like, well, I'm leaving in 2 days to head back to Moscow, so I need to do this dive now. Is there any way you can do it today or tomorrow even? And Tarek was like, no, that's not how this works. And Tarek understood this more than anybody else, because in addition to teaching diving at the blue hole, Tarek's job was to dive down to the bottom and retrieve the dead bodies of inexperienced or overconfident divers that attempted the archway and didn't make it. Although there is not an official body count of how many people have perished inside of the blue hole, locals believe it's as high as 200 people just in the last decade. After Tarek was unwilling to take him without properly training him and outfitting him with the right equipment, Yuri thanked him and went on to a couple different other diving instructors with the same request. Will you take me in the next couple of days? And they all said, no, we need to train you and you need special equipment. And so finally, after no one was willing to do this, Yuri just left. Later that day, owners of cafes that overlooked the blue hole remember seeing a young man who was by himself walk to the edge of the blue hole. He puts on all of his scuba gear, he puts on a helmet and then straps a big camera to the top and ratchets it down. And then after he's got all his stuff on, he jumps into the blue hole and he disappears. That man was Yuri. A few days later, Yuri's family back home in Moscow did not see him get off the flight he was supposed to be on, and they reported him missing. Tarek Omar was contacted to go down into the blue hole and see if Yuri was down there. Tarek hopped in the blue hole, he went to the bottom, and sure enough, lying face down at the bottom was Yuri. When they brought Yuri to the surface, they realized his camera had been running the whole time, and he had actually filmed his final moments. Yuri's final video exists online, so you can watch it for yourself, but here is a description of what happens. After situating his camera on his head just the way he wanted it, he hit record, and then he jumped into the water. It was determined later on that Yuri was breathing regular air out of his tanks. The camera submerges under the water, and then Yuri begins to sink very quickly into the blue hole. But his breathing seems normal, and he's not thrashing around, so it seems like it's a controlled descent. But at some point, you hear Yuri trying to activate his buoyancy compensator. Basically, it's this life jacket, to describe it simply, that sits on your gear that you have a demand valve where you can inflate and deflate the air into it to neutralize your buoyancy. Or in an emergency situation, you can fully inflate it and stop yourself from sinking. In fact, you'll rise to the surface. But he's trying to activate his buoyancy compensator to slow down his descent, and the air is escaping his compensator. There's a leak, and he can't slow down his descent. Now, Yuri was wearing a weight belt, which is very common in diving. In fact, I don't really know of all that many dives that you wouldn't use a weight belt. And any diver knows that there is a quick release function on your weight belt. Specifically, if you're in an uncontrolled descent or if you're in an emergency situation and need to get to the surface, you can jettison your weight belt and go to the surface. But Yuri was panicking and he was fixated on his buoyancy compensator that he was desperately trying to activate, and it was failing. And so he's not going for his weight belt. And then he rockets past the entrance to the arch. So he goes below 181 feet, he goes below 200 feet, and he goes all the way to the bottom where he hits the bottom at 392 feet. feet. And then he begins to slide because the bottom of the blue hole was actually at an angle, and that archway went all the way to the bottom of the hole. And if you slipped out of the blue hole, it was a sheer drop off for thousands of feet. And you see on camera, Yuri rolls over and he's desperately clawing into the mud to stop himself from sliding out of the blue hole to definite death. And he's trying to get himself to stop, and finally he anchors himself in the dirt. And it's calm for a second, and he's kind of looking around. It's very clear he's confused, and then it goes still. And it's believed at this point he either removed his mouthpiece because of nitrogen narcosis, he pulled it out and inhaled water, or he was dealing with O2 toxicity and he blacked out and the mouthpiece came out. But either way, he drowned. On April 25th, 2003, Ralston takes a trip to Utah where he plans to explore the Canyonlands National Park. He slept in his truck that night, and the next morning at about 9:15 a.m. he gets up, and it's this beautiful Saturday morning. He hops on his bike and he bikes 15 miles to Blue John Canyon. The canyon was an 11-mile gorge that at certain places was as narrow as 3 feet across. And so Aaron locks up his bike and he begins walking through this canyon. About 6 hours later at 2:45 p.m., Aaron is right at this section of the gorge that's getting really, really narrow, and below him is about 100 feet down to the bottom of the desert floor. He was gonna walk with both feet on either wall because it was so narrow and kind of Spider-Man his way through this section of the canyon. But as he began that maneuver, a huge 800-pound boulder became dislodged above him, and it comes tumbling down, and he barely gets out of the way, but it lands on his arm, and it pins his arm against the wall, and he can't move, and he's suspended 100 feet off the ground, and he's 20 miles away from the nearest paved road. Immediately, he tries to pull his hand free and push the rock off, but it's not going anywhere. And that's when it dawns on him that he didn't tell anybody he was going to be in this gorge today. No one knows he's here, and he's so far away from anyone that can help him, and he doesn't have a cell phone, he doesn't have a radio, he's got no way to communicate with anyone who could potentially help him. Now, the position he was in was not him dangling by his arm 100 feet off the ground. He was able to position himself against the rocks where he wasn't dangling. He was able to sit fairly comfortably besides his arm being crushed, and he was able to use the rock that actually had pinned him there as a sort of table or something to lean up against. And after he calms down a little bit, after a few minutes, he reaches back and he pulls his bag out in front and he starts taking inventory of what he has. And all he had was 12 ounces of water, so just a single water bottle, and he had 2 burritos and some candy bar crumbs. That was all he had. In terms of tools, all he had was this crummy multi-tool, and it did have a little knife that extended off the end, and almost immediately he takes that multi-tool and begins chopping away at this boulder to try to see if he can maybe crack it and push half of it off. But he's finding out very quickly that it's completely futile. It is not moving. It is an enormous boulder. It's not going anywhere. He cannot possibly break it with this crappy little multi-tool. As the sun began to set, Aaron started thinking really seriously about trying to cut his arm off. But again, all he has is this multi-tool and this crappy little dull knife, and he's thinking there's no way I can cut through my arm. There's bone in there. I can't possibly saw through the bone. And so very disheartened, he puts his multi-tool away and he begins to nurse the water and slowly eat the food and thinks maybe some miracle will happen where over the next couple of days, someone will be within earshot. I can yell to them and they can come get me, or maybe someone will see me when they're hiking overhead. I can just wait it out. But by the 5th day, he had run out of water. He was becoming delirious. He was actually drinking his own urine at this point, and he expected to die overnight. And so with his multi-tool, he etched his name into the rock, and then underneath it, he etched the date he expected to die, which was the next day. And then after that, he put his multi-tool down, and he did have a camera with limited battery, and he pulled that out, and selfie style, he filmed goodbyes to his family.
My name's Aaron Ralston. My parents are Donna and Larry Ralston of Englewood, Colorado. Whoever finds this, please make an attempt to get it to them. Be sure of it. I would appreciate it.
After he was done filming, he put the camera away and he leaned up against the rock and fully expected to die. But he starts to have this really intense dream where he sees himself playing with a child and he's missing his right arm. And he takes that as a sign that he's supposed to chop his arm off and get out of here alive and go start a family. And so he wakes up from this dream and suddenly all he wants to do is survive. And he looks at his arm, which is already starting to decompose at this point, and he thinks to himself, I know I can't cut through bone, but what if I'm able to break my arm clean through? I can take this blade and cut through the break in the bone. And so he began testing using the edge of the rock as a fulcrum to see if he'd be able to break his arm, using the torque of pushing it over the edge of the rock. And when he started to sense it was possible, he took a deep breath, and then he broke his arm, takes his multi-tool, and over the next hour, he would painstakingly saw through his entire arm. Once his arm was free, he couldn't believe it. He actually smiled when he saw his arm still pinned underneath the rock because of his sheer will to live at this point. And high on adrenaline, he climbed the 65 feet out of this canyon with his one arm. He gets to the trail and he runs 6 miles, and he happens to run into a group of hikers. They give him food and water, and they're totally alarmed by him, but they're happy to help him. They call 911 and medics arrive and they save Aaron's life. Following Aaron Ralston's rescue, they went back to retrieve his arm. But in order to move that boulder, they had to bring out 13 park rangers, a hydraulic jack, and a winch, and all this heavy equipment, and they were barely able to move it. And they told Aaron, had you still been in place, there's no way we could have placed the equipment without killing you. So basically, you had to cut your arm off in order to get out of there. There was no other way out. And so for Aaron, I'm sure that felt pretty good to feel like you cut your arm off and that was the right decision. They would take his arm and they would cremate it and give the ashes to Aaron. And Aaron, after having his cremated arm for a couple of days, decided, no, I need to put this where it belongs. And so Aaron went back out to the canyon where he had been trapped, and he scattered his ashes over the boulder that had nearly killed him. In 2010, Aaron's ordeal was turned into a huge blockbuster movie called 127 Hours, where James Franco plays Aaron Ralston in the movie, and it's an incredible movie, albeit it's pretty hard to watch. Aaron Ralston himself said the movie, although it's a drama, is pretty much a documentary because James Franco does an incredible job portraying his emotions and what it was actually like to be trapped underneath this boulder for 5 days. On the evening of October 28, 2006, in a Florida city called Port Richey, a 37-year-old woman named Marisa Weber walked in the front door of her home and called out a greeting to her mom. Her mom didn't call back, but Marisa could hear her in the kitchen making dinner, and so Marisa walked over to say hello. But Marisa only got about 2 feet into the family's very cramped living room when one of their many cats came bombing into the room and nearly knocked Marisa over as it ran past her and ran up to the side of the wall and just stopped and stared at the baseboard of the wall like there was something there. Marisa was totally annoyed by this cat, and as she looked over at it, she knew what it was doing, because lately Marisa had noticed there were clearly rats in her family's home, kind of scurrying around in the ceilings and the walls. Marisa could hear them all the time, and one of their cats was now clearly hunting one of these rats. And this totally stressed Marisa out. She'd actually begun taking anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication largely because of this rat infestation, and really just the fact that Marisa hated living at her parents' home, but she didn't really have the means to go out and live in her own place, which she knew would solve the problem, and so she was just kind of stuck here. And so Marisa turned away from the cat and likely the rat behind the wall, and she made her way through the tight little living room into the kitchen, and she gave her mom a quick hug, and she saw her dad was also in the room as well, and he said hello to her. And then Marisa's mom offered her some food, but Marisa said, you know what, I'm not hungry, thank you, I'm just tired, I'm gonna go to bed. And so Marisa again gave her mom a hug, she said goodnight to her dad, and then she turned, walked up the stairs, and made her way to her bedroom. She went inside and shut the door. The next morning, Marisa's parents got up and they began making breakfast and getting ready for the day, but Marisa did not come downstairs, and so the parents assumed she must have left early for her job. Marisa was a secretary at a waste disposal company. And so the parents just had their breakfast and they too went out for their jobs. And then in the evening, when the parents were back home, Marisa did not come home at the time she normally would after work. But the parents were not actually that concerned right then because they figured, okay, well maybe she left early and she came home from work early, and so we just kind of missed her on both ends, and that's why her door to her bedroom is shut. She's just come home early, and she's in there, and she wants to be left alone. After all, she's a 37-year-old woman. She probably wants her space. But later that night, when still the parents had not even heard their daughter moving around up there, the mother went upstairs and knocked on Marisa's bedroom door. But there was no answer. And so finally, Marisa's mom opened the door, and the room was totally empty.
Now, at this point, the parents did start to get concerned because they're thinking, okay, well, we didn't see her this morning, we haven't seen her now, we don't know where she is. But again, their daughter is 37 years old, and if she wanted to go do something out of the house by herself and not tell anyone, she was kind of entitled to do that. And so the parents ultimately decided that they would just let this go for now, and in the morning, they were sure to see her. But the next morning, the parents still had not heard from Marisa, she had not come home, and now they were officially starting to panic. In particular, the mother was worried that Marisa might have been kidnapped or something going to or coming back from work, because Marisa was only 5'3" tall and maybe 100 pounds, so she was really small. And so Marisa's mom called her other daughter, Gina, in a total panic, saying, your sister, she's missing, we don't know where she is, she might have gotten kidnapped, come over and help us figure out what's going on. And so Gina came over to the house, and when she came inside, she told her parents, let's stay calm here. Marisa, she's 37, I'm sure she's fine. Let's search the house and see if there's some note or something from Marisa explaining where she is and what she's doing. And so the family searched the whole house, starting with Marisa's room, but they couldn't find anything that gave them any clues about what happened to Marisa. But they did eventually find Marisa's purse that was still in her room, and when they opened it up, they saw her wallet was still inside. And so that sent up a huge red flag for the family. They're thinking, why would Marisa go anywhere for an extended period of time without her wallet? That made no sense. And so at this point, the family did call the police, and they reported Marisa missing. But the police got nowhere on the case, and so on November 9th, so 12 days after Marisa had said goodnight to her parents, gone up to her room, and then vanished, the family was at a total loss for what to do. But Gina, Marisa's sister, had begun to think to herself, hey, it's possible that Marisa, who was not doing well mentally, she was very unhappy, she was totally stressed out about this rat infestation, which really highlighted the fact that she was stuck at home with her parents at 37 years old. Gina's thinking that it was totally possible that Marisa had just abruptly run away, or worse, maybe she had harmed herself. And so on November 9th, Gina decided she would take one more pass through the family home and just see if she could find any little indication that would give away what was going through Marisa's mind before she vanished. And where Gina started was in Marisa's room. And so Marisa, she went upstairs, down the hall, she opened up her sister's bedroom, and she walked inside, and you gotta picture this space. It was totally cluttered, almost like a hoarder's space. There were piles of clothes that were taller than a human person. I mean, this room is totally packed with stuff. But Gina, she took her time kind of walking through the room, looking everywhere, kind of sifting through all the piles of junk and clothes and everything in the room, and she couldn't find anything. But then at some point, her attention was drawn to her sister's bookshelf, and she looked over at it, and she thought she saw something odd right in the middle of the shelf. Now, Gina had a flashlight with her, and even though the light was on in the room, she still lifted up the flashlight and turned it on and shined it at this thing in the middle of the bookcase. And when she saw it, she screamed. Based on Gina's discovery, here is what happened to Marisa Weber on October 28th, 2006, the night she disappeared. That night, Marisa had come home, she saw her mom and dad in the kitchen, she was offered food, she turned it down and said, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. She went upstairs, she went into her room, closed the door, and sat down on her bed. Then Marisa grabbed a pill bottle next to her bed, which contained morphine and codeine, which are two very powerful painkillers. They're opiates, so highly addictive. She popped a few of those, and then she rolled a marijuana joint and smoked that, and then she grabbed the TV remote and sat back on her bed, getting ready to zone out. But when she tried to turn on the TV, which was sitting on this bureau on the other side of the room, it didn't turn on. And right away, Marisa knew that the TV likely had become unplugged. This was something that happened periodically. The room was so packed with stuff that sometimes when Marisa was just navigating through her room, the stuff would bump into the bureau, and that would in turn jostle loose the plug from the TV. But the TV was actually not plugged in right behind where this bureau was. The TV was sitting on the bureau, but the plug ran down and kind of to the side of the bureau behind this huge bookcase that was pressed right up against the bureau. But this bookcase was so loaded down with books and things that Marisa had collected over the years that not only could you not really reach through the bookcase to the wall, but it was too heavy. You couldn't move the bookcase. And so the only way to access this plug from the TV was to climb on top of the bureau where the TV was and kind of reach back and grab the plug behind the bookcase and plug it back in. And so Marissa, who was likely beginning to feel the effects of all the drugs she had taken, climbed on top of this bureau, and she reached back behind the 6-foot-tall bookcase, and she began trying to grab the plug, but it was just out of reach. And so she leaned farther and farther and farther until she finally grabbed the plug, but when she managed to plug it back into the wall, she slipped forward and fell headfirst into this tiny space behind the bookshelf and the wall, and she got pinned upside down. Now, we don't know why Marissa didn't begin calling out for help. Perhaps she was so under the influence of these drugs that she couldn't really process the situation and didn't know what she should do. Or maybe she was embarrassed about the fact that she had somehow gotten trapped upside down behind her bookcase. But either way, she didn't call out for help right away. And unfortunately, what happens when a human body is trapped upside down long enough is all the blood rushes to the upper part of your body. It causes your eyes eventually to pop out of your head. It feels like your head's going to explode. But the real problem is all that blood pools around your lungs and restricts your lungs and makes it really hard to breathe. And critically, if you can't take a big breath in, you can't project your voice loud enough to call out for help. And so Marissa did not call out for help during those first critical few moments she was trapped behind the bookcase. And then when she realized she absolutely couldn't move, she didn't have the lung capacity to call out for help. And so likely for 1 or maybe even 2 days, Marissa remained upside down behind this bookshelf and likely was aware of her family coming in and out of her bedroom looking for her, but she was not able to vocalize. She could not get their attention, and so eventually she died. Marissa's family would say when they were looking for Marissa in her bedroom while she was dying behind the bookcase, they said they did hear sounds, but it sounded like the rats that were running all over their house, and so they didn't know it was actually likely Marissa moving around behind the bookcase trying to get their attention because she can't use her voice. And then after Marissa died, her family did continue to go back into her room to look for her, and they began to smell something funny, which was Marissa decomposing, but the family didn't know that, and they chalked it up to the fact that the room was really messy, and again, there are rats in this house. I mean, this was not a clean space, and so they kind of thought, okay, the smell can't be anything serious. It wasn't until November 9th when Marissa's sister, Gina, was back in Marissa's bedroom and she looked over at the bookcase and she saw something strange. What she saw was her sister's foot right behind the bookcase. Gina couldn't really process it, so she got her flashlight out, she shined it on the foot, and when she scanned from the foot down, she realized it was her sister. On the morning of June 25th, 2007, a 28-year-old man named Mike Barnett woke up to the sound of pounding rain on the roof of his home, which was located in Hull, which is a city in northern England. Mike groaned as he rolled out of bed. It had been raining like this for the past month, and he and the rest of the people in Hull were just totally over it. But another reason he groaned is he knew that he would have to go to his job at a tropical fish store, even though he was not scheduled to work that day. There was a street right behind the tropical fish store that always completely flooded out from all these debris getting clogged in the drain, and the owner of the tropical fish store, so Mike's boss, who was an elderly guy, he would always go out and try to clear the debris himself, and Mike just knew, he really needed help, and today he knew his boss would be out there, and so he just felt like it was his responsibility to go in and help him clear out the debris. So Mike got dressed, he had some breakfast, and then as quietly as he could, he slipped out the front door. Mike was careful not to make too much noise because he didn't want to wake his dad, who he lived with. Mike and his dad had always been very close, but after the death of Mike's mother, he and his father had become even closer, and so they actually really enjoyed living together. But Mike also knew that his dad was very protective of him and very likely would not like the idea of Mike going out in this horrible storm to go try to clear debris in a flooded out street. It just was too dangerous. And Mike just didn't want to deal with that right now, and so he was able to slip out without waking up his dad. Mike hopped in his car and he drove to the fish store, and as soon as he got there, he hopped out, he went around to the back side of the shop, and sure enough, the entire street out back was totally flooded. Clearly, debris had blocked the drainage system. Now, Mike's boss was not out there yet. Mike could see him inside the shop, kind of going about his morning, and so Mike, without even going inside, just began wading into the water to begin clearing debris. The drain that was clogged by all this debris was located just off to the side of the sidewalk. It was down in a culvert. And so Mike very carefully walked off that sidewalk into this very cold, muddy water, and he began moving in the direction of where he knew the drain was. And so as he's walking, the water is down to his ankles, maybe up to his knees at some point, but he gets closer and closer to where he knows this drainage is down in this culvert. And suddenly, Mike begins feeling this unbelievable suction at his feet that began pulling him basically straight down. Mike tried to move, but his feet were anchored to the ground, and then before long, he began getting pulled forward towards this drain, and then down he went. And as he went all the way down to his neck in the water, he felt this unbelievable pain in his thigh. Mike didn't know it, but his leg had been sucked through the drainage gate that was all blocked up. There were still some holes in it, and so his leg had gone through one of those holes, and it had pulled him all the way up to the top of his thigh and brutally snapped his leg in the process. And so Mike is in blinding pain from his leg being shattered and run through this grate, and he's literally up to his neck in this frigid water, and the wind's blowing and it's raining and the water's going in his mouth. And so Mike begins to panic and he's trying to pull himself out. He can't, and then he begins screaming for help. And at that moment, the owner of the fish store, who was still inside the store, looked out the window and he saw Mike flailing around. And instinctively, the owner could tell, just from the panicked look on Mike's face, that whatever was happening to him was an emergency. And so the owner just picked up the phone, called the police, and after telling them what was happening, the owner ran out to Mike. When the first police officers arrived on the scene, Mike was still in the water up to his neck, and the shop owner was right next to him. And the police officers, they assessed the situation in front of them, and they thought, okay, clearly this guy, Mike, is trapped in the water. This is serious, but we can pull him out. That's the obvious solution here. And so the two officers walked up to Mike, they waded through the water and got on either side of him, kind of pushing the shop owner out of the way. And then the two officers grabbed Mike's shoulders. These are strong police officers, and they began pulling on Mike. And as soon as they did, Mike let out this unbelievably loud scream of just pure agony. And in fact, his scream was so guttural that the two officers let go and were kind of startled by it. And very quickly, these officers realized this situation is far worse than it appears. Because not only is this guy totally stuck and he can't be moved, but, they're looking around and the rain is still coming down, and it's clear the water is still slowly rising. And because Mike's body was situated over the grate, he himself was causing even more blockage, increasing how much the street was flooding. Meaning the officers knew they had to get Mike out as soon as possible, or he would drown. But over the next several hours, more police officers, firefighters, EMTs, Good Samaritans, everybody showed up on the scene, and there were so many attempts to get Mike out of the water, ranging from trying to cut the grate, but the water was too muddy so nobody could see through it, and the water was so strong that nobody could set the bolt cutters on the actual grate. And then at one point they even tied a winch around Mike and tried to pull him out with a Land Rover, but every intervention failed. The rushing water that was pinning Mike to this grate was so strong, and Mike's pain in his leg was so high, it made it nearly impossible to move him. And so finally, at the 4-hour mark that Mike has been trapped in this water, a decision was made amongst all the first responders to amputate. So the police called a doctor who was willing to perform the leg amputation, and then after doing it, Mike could sense something was up. Clearly it's not going well, and he began frantically asking the police and all the first responders, when are you going to get me out of here? When are you going to get me out of here? And they just kept telling him, soon, Mike, hold on, it's going to be okay. Meanwhile, the owner of the shop at this point had called Mike's dad to tell him what was going on. And so as all these people are waiting for this doctor to show up to cut Mike's leg off, Mike's father shows up and basically barrels through the crowd and starts screaming, "I'll get my son out of here." But as soon as he saw his son, he was totally taken aback. Mike was up to his chin in water. There was a diver behind him in the water with him, holding him up, barely keeping his head above the water. Mike's face was totally pale, and his eyes were totally unfocused, and he had this weird blank expression like he wasn't even there. And then a second later, a whole wall of police came running up to Mike's dad to stop him from getting any closer, and they told Mike's father they were doing everything they could to try to get his son out, and for now, they told him he just needed to go home. And so even though Mike's dad did not want to abandon his son, he could tell with all these police standing there in front of him, there was no way he was going to be able to go up there with his son. And so he would turn around and head back home without even speaking to his son. And then, when Mike's dad got home, he turned on the news, and the news was showing live coverage of his son trapped in that grate. And just a couple of minutes later, Mike's dad would watch his son die on the news. By the time that doctor arrived with that special saw to cut off Mike's leg, it was already too late. Mike had passed away from hypothermia.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.